Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the finale, day 9 of the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. I'm your host, Chef AJ, here with Toby, and we wish you a glorious day. We have so many prizes to award today, grand prizes, in fact. Things like a high-powered blender from Instant Pot. It's called the Ace Blender, an Instant Pot air fryer, the new 8-quart Instant Pot air fryer combination. We've got a nonstick pan from Melfi. We've got a Holland bowl from the Holland Bowl Mill in Michigan with a mezzaloon. We've got forks over knives, meal plans, and more. And if I sound a little tired, it's because I literally have been up all night reading all the wonderful comments and stories that you've sent in. And honestly, I wish there was a way I could give everyone a prize for taking the time to write us and tell us their story and tell us what the summit meant to them. And if there's a way I can figure out to do it with some of the prize sponsors, I will. But I just want you to know how much we appreciate it. And if you didn't win, that doesn't mean you didn't have a great story. It just was so hard to decide. It's like the Academy Awards last week. They're all great actors, all great movies. Not everyone can win a prize, but we'll be doing this again, so stick with us. And I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about the summit. And, I think that they always say, well, not they, Tony Robbins says, repetition is the mother of skill. And that's why a lot of people are choosing to have the summit package for life. And you can get it at any time, but if you get it by midnight Eastern time tonight, which is 9 p.m. Pacific time, you will get a free buddy pass. So it's like getting 2 summits for the price of one. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Pacific. Midnight Pacific time, excuse me. So that gives you 3 extra hours. So 9 p.m. I can't talk. I'm tired. But anyway, it's tonight. And if you get it tonight, you get a buddy pass. And then you can give it to somebody who you either care about, or maybe your doctor who needs this information, or a friend or a family member or someone who's struggling. Because what you don't see is that we do give out quite a few scholarships for people that have true financial hardship. And we want to be able to get as many of those packages to those people that are either on fixed incomes, senior citizens, or disabled, who write us actually all year round waiting for this so that we can help them as well. So thank you so much if you have supported us, or just even by listening and sharing the summit. I could probably write a book of takeaways of the summit, but instead of doing that, we actually do transcripts, which if you get the virtual package, you get the transcript. If you get the physical package, you get all the DVDs of the speakers with an actual book that a lot of people like because it's very easy to look things up with. It's actually quite a nice book for your coffee table or anything. So, I don't know what my favorite takeaways were from the summit because there were so many. Each speaker had so much to offer. I tend to remember things that are little phrases. So like when Pam Peake said, the only place that success comes before work is in the dictionary. I'll always remember that because it's so true, because I understand that losing weight is hard, but most things in life that are worthwhile are hard and require some effort. I actually watched some of the Academy Awards last night. I didn't get to see it live because I have a class on Sunday nights during the Oscars. And they didn't have a host, but I remember when I was younger, they always had wonderful hosts of the Oscar, like Billy Crystal and Whoopi Goldberg, and even Johnny Carson, I would remember when I was little. But one year, Steve Martin was hosting the Oscars. And as you know, there's always very beautiful models that hand out the Oscars to the celebrities when they win. And Steve Martin was hosting, and he was commenting on this very beautiful, fit, trim woman who was the one handing out the statuettes. And he'd said, I would give anything to have a body and look like that. And then there was a pause. He said, except eat right and exercise. And so many people want results, but they don't want to put in any effort. They're looking for a quick fix. And you can do that. And of course, we're not criticizing anyone that's considering gastric bypass or has had it. Of course, you can't undo it. But if you listen to the interview with Dr. Vera Tarman, you know that there's really not a lot of efficacy for long-term success, because when you have gastric bypass, you're putting a Band-Aid on it. You're not dealing with what caused you to be morbidly obese. You're not dealing with the food addiction. You're not changing the problem, which, as Dr. McDougall has been saying for 50 years, it's the food. And so the purpose of this summit isn't to shame or blame or make you feel bad. It's to empower you to know that you can have control over your health destiny. And that's why, there's more than 40 hours of interviews with I believe there's 42 or so speakers this year that you can glean their knowledge from. And many of the speakers are not just medical experts, but they're success stories themselves. Dr. Jen Hawk, who lost 90 pounds. She's closing in on losing 100 pounds. So she gets how hard this is. Chef Bravo, 50 pounds. Tammy, almost 50 pounds. Myself, 50 pounds. And many other speakers. Dr. Sylvia Tara struggled with her weight, and so did Dr. Susan Roberts. So they get how hard this is. And even the ones that don't maybe have the problem themselves, like Dr. Roseanne Alviera, she has a genetic twin sister who was 50 pounds heavier. So she gets it. The speakers, we choose speakers not just on how popular they are, but on their knowledge and actually how compassionate they are, because we don't want people yelling at you. If criticizing and yelling worked, everybody would be slender by now. Yet at the same time, the speakers really told it how it was. They didn't mince words. Dr. Joel Furman, who was our kickoff speaker, told the truth about things like oil and sugar and salt, and that, a little bit isn't good, a little bit will hurt. And he really understands food addiction probably better than most, because that's not really widely understood yet in the medical community, especially in the plant-based community, where we're told that if we ask people to do something difficult, like not have oil or maybe not have sugar and salt, we're making it too hard to eat a plant-based diet. And if you can have those things and be happy with your weight and not have a lifestyle disease, maybe a little bit is okay. But most people that come to me have learned that a little bit will hurt and that moderation hasn't worked. Let me ask you guys a question. If moderation truly worked when it came to diet and lifestyle, how the heck do we have 38% of our population obese? It's not working for them. It doesn't seem to be working for the over 70% that are overweight. So again, I mean this with all the love in my heart. If you can do a less restrictive program, but also get the results that you say you want, which is the complete reversal of your lifestyle disease and a trim body, do it. The thing is I've worked with thousands of people now, especially women that are approaching menopause or have gone through it, and they just can't seem to do it. There's always going to be a percentage of the population that genetically can eat whatever they want. You've seen people like that. My husband Charles, Dr. Doug Lyle. These are the ones that don't understand this problem, that probably you shouldn't share the buddy pass with, because they can push themselves away from the table. These are like the people that can drink one drink and not become alcoholics. But if you can't, then it's probably not you, and a different approach is needed. And you don't have to say, well, I'm never going to have this the rest of my life, but why not try it for 30 days, maybe even 60 days or 90 days, and see if it works. The thing is, it's really never not worked. The problem is it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. And there are people that just won't be able to do it. So for you, eat the healthiest diet you can. I love how Dr. Furman talked about oil not being a health food. He's even said, he may not have said it in this summit, but I have had the privilege of speaking with him at many conferences, sharing the stage, and I've actually heard him say, and I believe it's on one of his YouTubes, that oil causes cancer, specifically breast cancer. And how? Well, because it makes people fat. The fat you eat is the fat you wear, as Dr. McDougall's been saying, and all the speakers have advocated a lower fat diet is the way to control weight and to optimize your health. But until Dr. Furman said it the way that he said it, I don't think a lot of people understood that oil is absorbed so rapidly in the body that it actually halts weight loss immediately, because your body thinks that if you're eating it, you must want to store fat. And that's why a little bit will hurt. That's why restaurants are not your friend. I can go into this in a little bit more detail later as a former restaurant chef, but there is no such thing as a compliant meal in a restaurant. And I think you're fooling yourself if you think you are, because no oil to a restaurant just means no added oil. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And he was not afraid to say how salt is a strong inhibitor of taste. It's also an appetite stimulant. And then when you spice your food up, even without salt, you're just going to eat more food, which, if we're trying to get you to eat vegetables at first, might be a good thing. But if you're overweight anything that's going to get you to eat more but not weigh less might not be a good thing. But eating a diet high in green vegetables is one of the best things you can do for weight loss, for food addiction, and all the speakers corroborated that, like Dr. Greger, because of these thylakoids. The science to me is absolutely fascinating. I'm a bit of a science nerd, and when I am interviewing these speakers, I have my jaw hanging open. You can't see it because only the speakers are showing, but I love learning new things, especially about this subject, because I didn't have the truth about Weight Loss Summit when I was obese. I had to figure most of this out by myself, but thankfully I met a lot of the speakers like Dr. Lyle and Dr. Goldhammer and Dr. McDougall, and was able to go to Santa Rosa where they actually were able to teach me this so that I can now share what I know with you. And Dr. Furman isn't a fan of the artificial sweeteners, the stevia, the erythritol, the xylitol, the mannitol. He says when you use those, you can't enjoy your food. And there's so many problems with them as well. They're linked to having an unfavorable microbiome. And you trick yourself to always desire more sweet when you're using these 0-calorie sweeteners like stevia and erythritol. So you want to stay away from those as well. But I think my favorite thing that Dr. Furman said after the thing that works best is abstinence, I was so glad to get that on record, is that if you don't like vegetables, you better live close to a hospital. And I think it's true, because the food that is lowest in calorie density, that has all those thylakoids that are going to help you bust cravings and turn off the hunger switch, well, they're also the food highest in nutrient density, linked to prevention of all kinds of diseases, especially things like Alzheimer's. So that was pretty cool. I really, really liked that. And I also liked what he said about unless you stick with it forever, it's of no benefit. And that's why, people say, well, why are you always bashing the weighing and measuring programs? They work. Yeah, they work as long as you do them. But the majority of my business comes from people that failed miserably on them. And by failed, I meant failed to keep the weight off. Anytime you restrict calories, carbs, portions, you're going to lose weight. But on these weighing and measuring programs, they either allow you only 4 ounces of starch a day or no starch. I eat 4 pounds of starch a day and I'm lean. The problem is you can't stick with it, and then you get so hungry you end up binging and overeating, and these are the hardest people that I work with because they have this mindset that the only way to be trim is to restrict, and it's the exact opposite that is true. It's like Josh LaJohny said yesterday, instead of making your stomach smaller with gastric bypass, we make your food bigger with nutrient-rich, calorically dilute food. And one of the best things you can do is educate yourself in the work of Dr. Barbara Rolls, because when you truly, truly understand calorie density, not just give it lip service, but understand it and implement it, you really can eat more and weigh less. And if you're somebody that likes to eat, every day is Christmas when you understand calorie density. And it was interesting how Dr. Furman said that it's actually not overeating that gives us the most pleasure. People think, oh, if I eat this hyperpalatable food, if I stuff myself, I'm going to feel better. But it's the not overeating that gives you the most pleasure. And I think part of it has to do with some of the concepts that Dr. Lyle and Dr. Hawk talk about our internal audience. Because even if we're at a slender weight, our body is never not looking. And when we go off plan and eat things we know that aren't good for us, our internal audience can often get disgusted with us. And to feel good, to have self-esteem, we want to make that internal audience proud. For those of you that still think eating at restaurants are going to be figure-friendly, Dr. Roberts has a laboratory at Tufts University right next door to a restaurant. And she's actually able to take that restaurant food and actually accurately assess the amount of calories in it. And you can't really do that at home with food that you eat at home, and you can't even really do that at restaurant foods on your own. But she has the technology to do that. And she says the average restaurant meal is something like 1,500 calories. A lot of it comes from the oil, which is hidden, which contributes not at all to satiety. It doesn't activate those stretch receptors or those nutrient receptors or those calorie receptors. And they've done studies which show that people can eat 500 calories from oil at a restaurant, eating the same meal at home without oil, but they don't feel any fuller. But where do those fat calories go? Where do those extra 500 calories go? because you don't compensate the next day, she says. So in other words, let's say you're a petite woman and you only get about 1,500 calories a pound per day as your caloric allotment, and you go to that restaurant and you eat that meal, but you can't sense that there's 1,500 calories in it because a lot of it comes from oil, which doesn't contribute to satiety. Well, the next day, do you then go eat 0 calories? No, you don't. Nobody course corrects the next day when they overeat. And restaurants are terrible, Dr. Roberts says, and I concur, because they normalize overeating. And Dr. Roberts knew, like many of the other speakers, like Dr. Guillonet and Dr. Lyle and Dr. Hawk, that our genes are just out of whack for the environment we live in. We were designed for an environment of scarcity, and now we live in an environment of abundance. And that's why the environment is so important. And variety encourages overeating, she said. So did Barbara Rolls. So not to say you have to eat sweet potatoes and broccoli every day, but be mindful that the buffet effect can occur. The more choices you allow yourself at every meal, the more you are going to eat. And if you're trying to lose weight, that is not a good thing. But she understands that if you take this approach we're teaching, you can eliminate calorie counting forever, because she said it will fail. She says calorie counting will fail. And she knows. She has worked with so many people at Tufts University. And she said, if you want to do this, the low-fat vegan approach that we teach, she says that absolutely can work, because the key components are fiber and water. Again, volumetrics. Dr. Rolls set the stage for this work for so many of us to understand and implement. And she talked about how low-carb diets, we risk premature death with them. So yeah, you can go on keto and drop weight quickly, but again, is that going to be sustainable? And she agreed completely with Dr. Furman when she said, once you eat a food repetitively, you can learn to like anything. But as Dr. Furman said, it can take 15 times to eat a new food for it to become a preferred food. Dr. Tarman's talk was so interesting because it's something that's not often talked about. And as a medical doctor who runs a clinic for food addiction, she actually sees firsthand that, again, there's always going to be outliers. So there's going to be people that maybe that have had success with gastric bypass, but by and large, most of the people that she has seen and that I have seen suffer tremendously from it, not just maybe from poor nutrient absorptions, but because they were able to gain the weight back by bypassing the bypass. We've heard from so many of you in the summit who have had relatives that actually died from that surgery. It is not without risk. It's not like getting your teeth cleaned. This is major surgery, completely disfiguring your body like that. Do you think nature made a mistake with your stomach? There are ways to do this without having to resort to surgery. You can always bypass the bypass, gain the weight back, or you can do caloric density on a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet, which is nature's gastric bypass. And she talked about the efficacy of medications too, and about how often people that have had gastric bypass become alcoholic because they can no longer medicate with food and get that hit of dopamine because now their stomach is so artificially small, but alcohol can still be taken in abundance, and she talked about that as well. So definitely, if you've got the summit package, you definitely want to listen to her again, because this is her life's work. She's not just doing this as a researcher looking at research. This is somebody that is in the trenches working with people every day who are obese, who are food addicts, as she once was herself. She walks the talk. Dr. Barnard really shed the light on hormones, and they're a big deal, especially for us women as we approach menopause, that he says when you you can actually change the hormones that are circulating in your bloodstream by what you eat. And that cheese and dairy products have estrogens in them, and fat of any kind is going to drive up your estrogen. And he talked about how weight and fertility are intimately related. I have a client who's a gynecologist now who suffers delivering babies now from the women because so many of them are obese and morbidly obese and have such high risk pregnancies. And it's just was not easy for them to get pregnant in the first place, but there are so many more complications in these cases because of their weight. So get your weight under control first before maybe you have a baby, because it can lead to so many complications. But the main thing is avoid those dairy products. Even if you're not willing to go full on plant-based, there is no reason to be consuming dairy products. You know, most of the hormones and antibiotics are used on animals to keep the cow pregnant while she is still nursing, which never would happen in nature. And so when you consume the meat, the milk, the cheese, the yogurt, the ice cream, you're basically consuming hormones and antibiotics. And this is why little girls are getting their periods at 6 years old. I read on the online recently a girl got pregnant at 8. How could that happen if it wasn't for getting these dairy hormones at such a young age? We're supposed to get our period at 15, 16, 17 like they do in other countries. So dairy is not your friend, and it's not a friend of weight loss either, by the way. It's 1,600 calories per pound, just looking at caloric density. And the majority of the saturated fat that people get is from cheese, and we know saturated fat is not good. That's one thing even the people on the other team agree about, and there's no minimum daily requirement for it as well. So Dr. Barnard talked about how people who do well are the ones who embrace the healthy carbohydrates and don't worry about how much fruit they're eating. And he talked about when you keep the fat low, your ability to handle the carbohydrate improves. And this is what Mastering Diabetes, Robbie and Cyrus talked about. And also cheese has opiates in it. And as you digest it, it releases these morphine-like compounds, which is why my friend, the mad cowboy Howard Lyman, said when he quit cheese, it was actually harder than quitting smoking. But if you could only do one thing as a result of this summit, and I hope that you'll consider doing more than one thing, getting dairy out of your diet permanently would probably be the first thing that I would recommend. I enjoyed talking to Dr. Sylvia Tara. She was referred by Dr. Dr. Roseanne Alviera, and she struggled with weight herself. And she talked a lot about leptin and why when we lose weight, we can get hungry because when you lose weight, you produce less leptin. When the brain detects there's less leptin, you increase your appetite. But if you're eating the lose weight with a full plate method, you don't have to be hungry because you can be eating huge volumes of salads, steamed vegetables, fruit, calorically dilute starches like winter squashes, and even the more calorically dilute starches like rice and beans, sweet potatoes, which really aren't calorically dense. They're less than 600 calories per pound. But when we lose weight, our metabolism slows, so we burn fewer calories, and about 22% to be exact, which is why people can't maintain their weight loss. Again, if you don't do in maintenance phase what you did in weight loss phase, even more diligently, you will gain the weight back, because realize when you're trimmer, you need less calories. And she says it's about 22% fewer calories. And Dr. Olvera says that this doesn't stay this way forever, especially if you're exercising, but this is something you have to be aware of. And so if you want to continue eating the same amount of food that you're used to eating or even more, this is where you really have to understand calorie density and maybe even sequence your meals and start with a broth-based soup or an all non-starchy vegetable soup, or start every meal with a salad. But again, these vegetables are really the key, and they're magical, and these are the one foods that is the hardest to get people to eat. She says your fat will come back because that's what it's designed to do. She talked about how fat was like an entity of itself. It's like its own organ, and it's stubborn, but it's not impossible. But she says you have to pick a diet that works for your psychology and lifestyle. So if you're somebody that travels a lot, that just wants to eat at restaurants, you're going to have to figure out a way to do that, maybe by being 100% at home to allow for some indiscretions. And for your psychology, if you're somebody that's prone to that ego trap that Dr. Hawk talked about, which you can learn more about in episode 161 of the Beat Your Genes podcast, you might not be able to do abstinence. You might not be able to strive for the A+ diet that some of us find is actually easier at 100% than at doing 99%. So you've got to find what works for you. It's not a one size fits all. We can't paint everyone with the same brush, but it is a one size fits most. And there is got to be a version of a lower fat, whole food, plant-based diet that can work for everyone. But realize that some people are genetically thicker, and that more diligence, more strictness is going to be required if you want to get lean. And nobody has to be a size 2, but realize that a lot of women want that, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to improve your appearance. Like Dr. Tara says, she did it for vanity. It just so happens that this is also the best diet for health. But realize if you're somebody that genetically has those thicker genes, you probably are going to have to do more than somebody that doesn't. And so again, find what works for your psychology and lifestyle. But I loved how she said we have to be forgiving of ourselves. And, you dieted long enough. Now you got to start loving yourself. She says when men have a slip, they're like, oh, well, they don't care. They get back on. But when women do, it's like, oh, I had a cookie. I may as well have the whole bag. Now I may as well have a bag every day. We just have to learn to love ourselves and be compassionate. And Dr. Peak talked a lot about that as well, being compassionate, loving ourselves, for sure. Dr. Rolls is my hero. I would just, how a lot of people want to meet celebrities some days or singers. I want to meet her so bad. I would be willing to go to her laboratory at Penn State and be studied just because really without her work, I would not be where I am. There were many books written on calorie density, which I've since read and written one myself called The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss. I had on my bookshelf by Dr. Dean Ornish, Eat More, Weigh Less. I had on my bookshelf the McDougall Program for Maximum Weight Loss, the Pritikin Principle. And I had these books, but it wasn't until I found her book at a dollar bookstore. I feel like I should pay her more because I only paid $1 for her book at this used bookstore, that I understood it, because people learn differently. Some people like to listen. Some people like to watch. Some people need to have hands-on experiences. But the pictures in her book, somehow seeing that a quarter cup of raisins had the same amount of calories as 2 cups of grapes, it blew my mind. There were lots of other pictures, and I found more actually since reading her book, but it wasn't until I read her book that I understood what Dr. Ornish was teaching, what Dr. McDougall was teaching. She made it really understandable for me, and my goal in writing my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, was to make her work as understandable as possible for the most amount of people. So we owe a lot to Dr. Barbara Rolls, and she just understands about fiber and water. That's what you need to feel full. When you eat animal products, you're getting no fiber, you're getting no water. When you're eating processed food, whether it's vegan or not vegan, you're getting no fiber, you're getting no water. And when you eat foods that have no fiber and no water, you don't ever shut off the hunger drive, because you can't get your stretch receptors activated. You can't get your nutrient receptors activated. So you're going to keep eating. And Dr. Furman talks a lot about this. When you eat low nutrient food, you're always going to overeat on calories. And what happens when we overeat on calories? We get fat. That's not rocket science. That's just basic science. So when I eat a food, I always ask myself, first of all, is it from a plant? Is it from a whole plant? Is the fiber and water intact? And if the answer is yes, then I eat it. That's why things like juices aren't favorable, because you remove the fiber. Without the fiber, you just don't have satiety. And even smoothies, they're not horrible, but when you blend your food, you artificially reduce the bulk, which again reduces satiety. So if you want to feel full on fewer calories because you're trying to lose weight, you've got to eat your food whole with the fiber and water intact. Eat the apple, not the apple juice, not the dried apple, not the applesauce. And I go into great detail about this in my book, because this is such an important thing to understand, which is going to make you feel fuller, 2 cups of grapes or a quarter cup of raisins. You're going to get a lot more satisfaction from eating more food, because believe it or not, satiety begins with the eyes. And when you see large portions, you know you're going to be satisfied. That's why I feel so bad for people that do these weighing and measuring plans. I think they get something like 17 ounces of food per meal. I think it's 7 ounces of vegetables, 4 ounces of protein, and I don't know, it's a very small amount. But I mean, per meal, that's like per thing. Again, I eat 8 pounds of food a day. Robbie eats 13. Cyrus eats 11. Who the heck could eat 3 pounds of food a day, which is what they give you on these plans? No wonder people go get hungry. It backfires, and then they gain their weight back, and usually more, because they're using willpower, which we learned from a lot of our speakers. It just doesn't work. So, Dr. Roll said you've got to find a balanced eating style, which the whole food plant-based diet is, with ample portions, which calorie density is, that you can do indefinitely. Again, what can you do indefinitely? Not what you can do quickly to get to a certain size to fit into a dress for your daughter's wedding. One of the things that people don't like about this approach is the weight loss is slower. It's not slow. It can be a half a pound to 2 to 3 pounds a week, depending on how much you weigh. But compared to a restrictive program, it is slower. So again, we're encouraging you not to go on a diet, but to change your lifestyle completely. None of us that eat this way, like Dr. Furman, who I've had the pleasure of having over for dinner many times, feel like we're on a diet. We feel like we're eating the most delicious food on the planet, but that takes some time, because if you're used to eating a lot of junk, your taste buds have been hijacked, your brain chemistry has been hijacked, and it can take a while for this food to taste good. It can take 30 days for some, 90 days for others, 60 for some. I've seen one person who had the worst diet on the planet, basically eating fast food 3 times a day. Took her 120 days, but she got there. You can do it. We would not eat this way if it wasn't enjoyable. I promise you, we're not that diligent or extraordinary. We've just learned to fall in love with whole natural food, and that can happen to you too if you take the time to neuroadapt. If you have the package, or if you're going to get it, just listen to Dr. Goldhammer's interview again, because he talks a lot about this concept of neuroadaptation, which if you go to the True North Health Center and water fast can actually happen very, very quickly. I liked how Dr. Rolls talked about the stealth approach, especially for kids and husbands, which are basically large kids, because they generally tend to not want to eat vegetables. So you hide them in food. When you're making, for example, a recipe like my Chipotle bean burger, chop up some kale really finely. If you're making my recipe like my marinara sauce, which is oil-free, sun-dried tomato, you can hide vegetables in it that get blended, like carrots or beets or even greens. So you can hide vegetables in food where your family won't even notice, and then up their nutrients, and eventually they'll get used to them. So let's see, water. I loved her research about water, because I had asked the doctors that were on the summit if there was anything they wanted me to ask Dr. Rolls, and Dr. Garth Davis said, yeah, ask her about her research with water, because the idea is if water has no weight but it has volume, why can't we just eat a bunch of food, like maybe some processed food or chips or something, and then drink a lot of water? Won't that help us lose weight? Well, the thing is water has no calories. It has weight and volume, but it also exits the digestive tract pretty quickly, like in about 20 minutes. And I know Dr. Greger said, and Dr. Oliveira too said it might be a good idea to drink water before a meal. But according to Dr. Rolls' research, that it was so different that if they gave somebody bread and then they drank water versus if they mushed that bread up with water, there's something that happens when water is bound to the food, which just encourages satiety and prolongs eating time. So this is going to help you lose weight with a full plate and feel full on fewer calories. And what water does is the same thing vegetables do. When you think about it, vegetables are mostly water. They basically bulk up the food. And so you want to do that. Very much. And so she talked about sensory-specific satiety, and that was something that was talked about also by other speakers who basically say that variety encourages overeating. When I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Rolls on an audio teleclass many years ago, she talked about a trip she took to Italy, where I believe it was an all pasta dinner where there was 12 courses of pasta, and she said that by the time they were the 6th or 7th course, they were just sick of pasta. And they even, I think, had a dessert pasta, and they were stuffed and they were just so full and they were sick of pasta. But then they brought out this chocolate dessert and everybody ate it anyway, So that's kind of sensory specific satiety. The more that you allow yourself a variety. That's why I think about it. Don't we tend to eat more at buffets and potlucks or Thanksgiving than we do when we just go to a restaurant and get 1 or 2 things? I think about that a lot. If you listen to the bonus interviews that we had every day, you'll see that a lot of the concepts that were talked about by one speaker was talked about by another speaker. And the same thing happened in the original interviews. Dr. Rolls talks about how if you eat a particular food, it stops tasting as good. And I believe it was one of the speakers said the first bite of chocolate tastes better. Maybe it was Howard Jacobson, than the 20th bite of chocolate. So anyway, I really encourage you to learn as much as you can about calorie density. And make sure you watch Dr. Goldhammer's interview, because the ones that were picked as the bonus replays or the throwbacks, they were picked for reasons, because there was information there we felt that would really benefit you. And Dr. McMacken, she correlated what Dr. Olvera said and what Dr. Tara said. They used different words. Dr. Tara called it a calorie penalty. Dr. Olvera and McMacken talked about it as metabolic disadvantage. It's important you know about it, not be defeated by it, but that you know about it so you know why losing weight is really not that difficult, but maintaining weight is. And so that's why you need to do a complete lifestyle change and be in it for the long haul. If you ever wondered how you can eat carbs and reverse diabetes, Cyrus and Robbie are the go-to guys. Their book's coming out any day now. It's called Mastering Diabetes. It's the same name as their program, and they both are living with type 1 diabetes, but help people with not only type 1, but also type 1.5 and type 2. And they really understood and explained why you can eat a very, very high carbohydrate. And they're talking about complex carbohydrates, things like potatoes, rice, beans, fruits, and vegetables, and yes, all the fruit you want. Basically, that's mostly what Robbie eats, and still get favorable numbers and reverse insulin resistance. And they talked about how that is possible because Dr. Cyrus is a doctor, he's a PhD, and he understands the biochemistry of how this works. And so they not only were able to do that themselves, even though they had been told to go keto and even tried it, but that you can eat a low-fat diet and reverse insulin resistance, because they talked about how keto diets will cause short-term weight loss and quick results, but you're giving yourself a future of other diseases, and there's actually no long-term studies on anybody who has eaten keto. And all the long-term studies are on people like in the blue zones who eat the way that we recommend. Oh, thank you. Having a little glass of water brought to me so that I can continue to share my takeaways. And they talked about saturated fat and how it's not favorable for diabetes. Fat in general, people always think diabetes is caused by sugar. And once you have it, true, you can't eat sugar, but it's caused by fat. And Dr. Barnard also talks a lot about that in his book, Reversing Diabetes. So it's true that once you have it, it's harder at first to eat these carbohydrates, but they can teach you how to do that. And everybody needs to avoid saturated fat. But where do we get that? Only in animal products, which have no fiber, which have no water. And they talked about how saturated fat really is the biggest influence in diabetes. So they explained that the keto diet was actually invented for a specific purpose. It was kids with unretractable epilepsy. So it wasn't meant to be a diet for the masses like it is now. And the reason the body can't tolerate the carbohydrates is because you build up the insulin resistance. And so, again, this can get better when you start eating the low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. And they talked about how when you still have fat in your cells, the blood sugar goes up. This was very high scientific stuff that I have to even listen to again because I don't understand it. But they're incredible the way they explain it for the masses, But again, their recommendation, add in more leafy greens, add in more non-starchy vegetables. That's pretty much what all the speakers are telling you. And Dr. Rolls is telling you the same thing. All the speakers are telling you everybody needs to eat more vegetables, more fiber-rich food. It's one of the most powerful tools we have is fiber. It not only affects every bodily process, it helps flush us out waste and toxins. It binds to cholesterol. And again, where are you going to get it? From plants. If you're on a keto diet, where are you going to get the fiber? There's no fiber in meat. There's no fiber in oil. These are completely fiberless foods. How these people go to the bathroom is beyond me. So fiber, and water, and that's the answer is always the whole plant food. And when people say, oh, I can't eat carbs because I have diabetes, then I refer you to the work of Dr. Walter Kempner, one of Dr. McDougall's heroes. And they still do his diet, which is called the rice diet at Duke University today, which was the only time my morbidly obese brother, who died from complications of his diabetes, lost weight. And Dr. Kempner gave his patients white rice, fruit juice, and white sugar, all carbs. And yet they all reversed their diabetes and not only lost weight, but lost weight to a very, very lean weight. And I would really encourage you to look up his work and the rice diet if you still think that carbs are going to make you fat or that you can't have rice. He said, if your environment is already high fat, eating carbs won't work, but in a low fat environment, it will work. So again, once you're already diabetic with insulin resistant, yeah, you can't be eating carbs if you're eating fat. But once you take the low fat approach that we're recommending for weight loss and for diabetes reversal, then you'll be able to eat these complex carbohydrates and enjoy them. And they said that in most people, type 2 diabetes is reversible in most people, and so they said, don't give up hope. Now, giving up hope was something that Tammy Kramer was going to do because she had yo-yo dieted for over 40 years. And then her simple strategies, which are my strategies that I teach everyone, helped her finally get a handle on that and maintain an almost 50-pound weight loss for, I think it's about 6 or 7 years now. And one of the keys was cleaning up her environment. And the second key was learning how to always have healthy food ready with wonderful batch cooking techniques that she teaches. But one of the biggest takeaways from the inspiring story that so many wrote about was her husband Tom, how she got him on board. So many people fail because of an unclean environment. Dr. Campbell has said, if you have temptation anywhere in your environment, you will fail. This is not your fault, by the way. It is not because you lack willpower or are weak-willed or lazy. It's because your brain was not designed for the environment with junk food in it. But she told him that she had a problem and she got him on board. And that's what we suggest you do with your families. It's not to tell them they can never have this food again or they're bad for eating it, but to tell them you have a problem and you're suffering, and will they help you? Every doctor I've talked to says that a loving family member, a loving spouse, will support someone in recovery. But you have to tell them what the problem is and negotiate that clean environment and do what Dr. Hawk and Dr. Lyle say, which is work harder on your environment than you do yourself. But she was able to do that by telling Tom. And at first, he kept his food in the garage, and then they locked it up. And eventually, guess what happened? He lost weight too. And so if it's good for you, it's going to be good for your whole family. There is a way to negotiate this, guys, and you can work with Dr. Hawk and Dr. Lyle, and if you can't afford a session, just call into their podcast for free, and they will teach you how to do it. It really can be done. And Tammy's got the system down so much. I've seen her house, how automated it is. Preparation always trumps motivation. And when people tell me, oh, Chef AJ, you have so much willpower, I don't have any more willpower than any of you. But why I've been successful keeping off 50 pounds for over 6 years now after a lifetime of overweight and obesity is because, number one, I have a clean environment, and number two, all I have to eat here is healthy food, which I continually replace through my own batch cooking techniques, which are simpler than Tammy's, but they work for me. And that really is the secret. Preparation will always trump motivation. If all you have is healthy food, guess what? You'll eat it. So that's what we have to work on. Let's see. We had Visanto Molina, the registered dietitian who works with Brenda Davis, who was a speaker last year, and she had a fascinating talk about blood sugar, things that I never even heard about. And she also is a success story. She's almost 80 years old, and she just lost 50 pounds recently. So when you say, well, it's too late, I don't have hope. Remember, guys, I didn't lose weight till I was 52. She didn't lose weight till she was like 77 years old. I've had clients in their 90s that have lost weight. It is never too late. As long as you're breathing, there's always going to be hope. And that's why we choose these speakers, not just for their incredible scientific knowledge, but because they're also inspiring stories themselves. I loved how she talked about how you need 150 grams of glucose to run your brain. And so these people that are on these weighing and measuring programs with no starch and like very little carbohydrate, or these people on keto, who's running their brains? I just don't get it, And she again said, just like Dr. Barnard, just like Robbie and Cyrus, don't have to be afraid of fruit. I don't see people walking around fat from eating too much food. It's fruit. It's never happened. Never, ever, ever. And yet people are so afraid to eat carbohydrates. If anything this summit can do for you, I hope it will alleviate your fear that carbs are not the enemy, at least unrefined complex carbohydrates. True, we don't want to eat processed and refined carbs like sugar and flour and alcohol, but carbs are what's going to make you healthy, happy, lean, and that's what we're supposed to eat, at least, 75, 80% of our calories from. All successful populations, as Dr. McDougall has said, has thrived on starch. So she was really fun to talk to. Dr. David Jenkins, I had no idea he was going to be such a lovely man. I didn't know anything about him, quite honestly, other than what I'd seen when he spoke at the McDougall Advanced Study Weekend. But I knew he had founded the glycemic index, and I wanted to know more about it because a lot of people say, I can't eat potatoes, they're high glycemic. Well, then I guess you can't eat a carrot either, because you know what? A carrot is very, very high glycemic. So let's just eat Haagen-Dazs ice cream then, because it's low glycemic. Well, he talked about how you would literally have to eat mountains and mountains of carrots to get any kind of a response. So to judge a food just on its glycemic index is not smart, because if you heard last year's summit with Dr. Frank Sabatino, what's even more important than the glycemic index is the glycemic load or the glycemic impact. Most people don't just eat a potato. I mean, there's some people, I've done that when I've been out and about and couldn't get food and have gone to Wendy's and have eaten just a potato. But in general, when we eat our potatoes at home, we're eating them with beans and corn and salsa. In my husband's case, a little guacamole. So we don't just eat one food. Most people don't do mono eating. So again, the glycemic index was invented by him to help people for a specific reason with diabetes, but it's not something that we need to worry about, because a lot of the carbs that we want you to eat are slow release carbs, like legumes, like whole grains. These are uniformly low, slow release carbs, and it's much different than eating sugar and flour and alcohol. And he also said that body weight is a big determinant of one's glucose tolerance anyway. So, maybe right now, let's say you're diabetic right now and you're testing with the meter, maybe you can eat a white potato right now. But I guarantee once you start reversing your insulin resistance and lose body weight, you will be able to eat large amounts of these complex carbohydrates. Just like I want to meet Dr. Rolls one day, I was very impressed that he actually knew Dr. Dennis Burkitt. He was the former, I don't know if it was called the chief medical officer in Uganda, but Dr. Burkitt was the one, he's also one of McDougall's heroes, that was responsible for getting Kellogg's to put fiber in their cereal. And he noticed that in Africa there was no colon cancer. And because they weren't having dairy, they weren't having processed food. And Dr. Burkitt is credited with a quote that I love, which is, if you pass small stools, you need large hospitals, which is why he is known as the Fiber Man. And I would have loved to have met him. I wish I could have met Nathan Pritikin, Dr. Kempner. I mean, gosh, if I was alive back then, we could have had them on the summit. But it was really fun to have somebody that actually knew Dr. Burkitt. And what surprised me about Dr. Jenkins' interview was that when I asked him what the real truth about weight loss is I didn't expect a response from somebody, especially that wasn't like a psychologist or a health coach, was that we need to support those that are struggling. So I would imagine that most people listening are people that actually have this problem themselves. But the people that need to listen are your friends and family members that are sabotaging you by not allowing you to live in a clean environment. If you were an alcoholic, would you let your family members keep alcohol in the house? I mean, that's insane. And you have to treat this the same way. Give yourself the gift of a clean environment for at least 30 days. See if it makes a difference. It never hasn't. But I really loved, he said that the people that don't have this problem, the people we live with, we need to support them. And I thought that was just a very, very beautiful thing to say. I heard the expression fecal bulk, which I love, that the more fecal bulk you have, the less cancer risk, which makes sense because I had a pre-cancer diagnosis when I was 43, when I was having my Coke Slurpee Dr. Pepper all dessert diet. And I actually had many precancerous polyps. And when I think back to that time, for the first 43 years of my life, I pooped maybe once a week, and it was very difficult and often, with blood in it. So I love this idea of fecal bulk decreasing cancer risk. Well, the only way you're going to get fecal bulk is eating a diet with bulk, eating the calorie dilute, but voluminous diet. You have to eat a lot of food to get a lot of fecal bulk. And that's because the food we eat is basically fiber and water. But he said that fiber puts the brakes on everything in terms of absorption, even if it's high sugar. That's why we don't have to worry about eating carrots. Anyway, He said plant foods are helpful because they have a large volume. And again, it's amazing how the speakers just interact with each other without even knowing that the other one was on the summit. So he was a lot of fun to talk to, and I was very happy to meet him. And I love meeting new people like Dr. Vivian Chen, who there's certain people you just hit it off with. And I said, gosh, if I'm ever in San Francisco, we got to hang out. She was just lovely, very pretty. Not that that matters, I suppose, if you're just listening, but she was just really nice and telling me things that I never heard, really. I know that Dr. Frank Sabatino somewhat touched on a little bit of these endocrine receptors last year, but his interview was on so many other things. She really focused on the toxins, using words like lipophilic, which I never knew, liking fat. Toxins like fat, they're stored in fat. And I guess they do that, she said, because then they don't affect the major organs and poison us. And she said this is more significant when we lose weight rapidly. But the way we explain to lose weight with a full plate, it is not rapid weight loss when we compare it to things like gastric bypass or keto or weighing and measuring programs, and you don't have to worry about it. You don't use that as an excuse not to lose weight because you're going to some of these toxins are going to come out. But she said the worst toxins of all are animal products, dairy, because of the hormones and antibiotics and the bioaccumulation. And she talked about how the gut microbiome is crucial to weight loss and to reversing insulin resistance. And she said the best way to eliminate toxins is something that honestly very few people do, that's even harder to get people to eat right, which is exercise. And not just taking your dog for a little stroll like I did this morning for an hour so that she could check her P-mail, but actually breaking a sweat. Like the Shirzais say, you've got to break a sweat for it to count. And guess what? Sweat is how you eliminate these toxins. She said that lifestyle, genetics, and environment all play a role. We can't do anything about our genetics, but we certainly can do something about our lifestyle by changing what we eat, how we move, and we certainly can do something about our environment if you're willing to have that hard conversation with your loved ones and family members to get yours cleaned up, and also, not using certain products that we know are going to be deleterious to us because they have these endocrine disruptors, makeups, beauty products. We really have to be careful with these because they can be toxic, She says that fat, especially saturated fat, promotes unfavorable bacteria, and that's not so good if we're trying to have a favorable gut microbiome. And she had a beautiful analogy about a piano, which I really encourage you to listen to again if you have the summit, because it's I love analogies. They really help me. And she said when we eat animals, we're eating all their toxins that they've accumulated throughout their life, and that when we drink milk, just like Dr. Barnard says, we're drinking estrogens. All the toxins and hormones pass through their milk, and they bind to our insulin receptors. They increase our IGF-1, and they can cause insulin resistance. And again, she's not mincing words that alcohol is good for us, because it's not. It's a toxin. And she explained how it reduces our liver's ability to perform detox functions because it has to detoxify from the alcohol first, which is a toxin. Have you ever wondered why they say being drunk is intoxicated? Alcohol is a neurotoxin, and some of the speakers even said it is linked to every cancer, as the World Health Organization has said. So this is not just about losing weight, this is about being healthy. It just so happens that the diet that is most favorable for weight loss is the one that's most favorable for your health, disease prevention, disease reversal. Dr. Angie Sadeki knows about the gut because she's a gastroenterologist, and she knows about a plant-based diet, and she admitted that she wanted to look better. She wanted to be able to wear a bikini, and that there's nothing wrong with doing this because you want to look better, because as you look better on the outside, you're also healing your arteries and feeling better on the inside. She said dairy's meant to blow up a cow. Cow's milk is for cows. It's for baby calves. It's not for us. We're the only species that drinks milk after maturity or drinks milk from another species, which is why a cow can grow to about 600 or 800 pounds in a year. She says that's what dairy does. It blows you up like a cow. So to think that it's anywhere healthy or favorable for weight loss is just crazy. And she said it contributes to both diabetes and obesity. And one thing that dairy doesn't have, no animal product has, is no fiber. And she talked about the caloric density of food and why oil is just such a silly thing to have. In general, you would never eat 13 to 16 ears of corn, but you think nothing of having a tablespoon of corn oil or more if you're eating processed food or restaurant foods. She talked about how lots of people with SIBO, small intestinal bacteria overgrowth, also have hypothyroidism. And she said that the recommendations for fiber of 30 grams a day is a joke. One artichoke has 10, so people are just not getting enough fiber. And she talked about the fecal transplants in mice, how that when they put from a heavy mouse into a thin mouse, the thin mouse got heavy, and vice versa, the heavy mouse got thin. And so we're not looking for fecal transplants as the answer to this obesity epidemic, but this is something that we definitely need to know, especially if we're on the receiving end, I would say, So she said that she's had lots of patients, and she says, if you're really following a low food, whole food, plant-based diet, it's pretty much impossible not to lose weight. So we had a speaker that's a registered nurse I believe she's in Thailand. Yeah, another beautiful woman named Nikki Bravada. And there were lots of birds singing in the background. And it's just interesting how so many people wrote how much they loved it and other people thought it was annoying. So it just shows that people perceive things differently. It's that old saying, two men looked out at prison bars, one saw mud and one saw stars. I guess some people look at things half full and some half empty or positive or negative, but I enjoyed talking to her. And she said toxins are everywhere. They're in our beauty products, and echoed how deleterious animal products are, not just for their toxins, but for their hormones and how they disturb our gut flora. And the more toxins you ingest, whether it's in food or in these beauty products that you're putting on your skin, it's going to be a bigger burden on our liver. But the fiber is the food that is most favorable for our gut flora. That's what all the speakers say. Fiber, fiber, fiber. The more fiber, the less toxins. And she talked about this idea of an everyday detox, and that smoothies are definitely better than juices, again, because they have the fiber. The saying that she said that I love is, and I love this because I'm pretty tired right now, it's when the going gets tough, go to sleep. And that's what I'm going to be doing after this summit is over for sure. And I'm sure Toby and the rest of the team will as well. She says that stress can change your metabolic requirements, and you have to do something that's going to be sustainable. That's all the speakers said, the same thing. You'll definitely want to watch her, though, not listen to her. She got the most beautiful blue eyes I have ever seen. And, again, some of these speakers are in other countries, and I'll probably never get to meet them, but I sure would like to have them all in person to do a summit. I think that would be absolutely phenomenal. Dr. Ron Weiss was really the last interview we did. We actually kind of were full, but he was so highly recommended by Dr. Furman. And again, when a speaker is recommended by another, like Dr. Tara by Dr. Oliveira, I'm never going to say no. And he added a lot of pieces to this puzzle of toxins, like, for example, a cash register receipt. Who knew that, I feel bad for that has endocrine disruptors, and think about people that are touching these all day. No wonder that I've seen now sometimes people in grocery stores actually wearing gloves. I never understood why. And just the other day I was getting gas and it said, do you want a receipt? And usually I say yes. I go like, hey, it's just a piece of scratch paper. I'll be able to take notes. And I said, no, I do not want a receipt. I do not want to touch a receipt. I had no idea. So that was really interesting. And I love how he used the word unpoisoned. He said we have to make eating unpoisoned food a priority. And so what might help you is to start thinking about some of these things that you're eating, like animal products, like dairy, like even vegan junk food, as poison. And he did not mince words about the Impossible and Beyond Burger being poison. And I get a lot of flack from vegans because I'm making it so hard to be vegan. But I got to tell you, I know a lot of vegans that have died from cancer, from heart disease, from diabetes, who were overweight and obese from eating these kind of foods. And while they certainly are better from the animals and largely for the environment, they're not human food. And they might be okay in the transition, and it's certainly better than eating at McDonald's, but we need to start eating actual food as grown, as Dr. Hans Diehl said. Dr. Diehl's presentation was one of the few with PowerPoints. There were a few. This is why if you choose to own the summit, you'll definitely want to watch a few of the interviews rather than just listening, like Visanto Molina's and Stefan Guyanet and Dr. Deal actually did an actual PowerPoint presentation, and he talked about what happened in this country to make us obese. And guess what? It wasn't from the Impossible Burger because it wasn't created, but it was from largely processed foods. Yes, we have increased the amount of animal products we've eaten greatly, especially cheese, but it was the processed food. And he always says, the bigger the snacks, the bigger the slacks. And we're going to learn about snacking, or we did learn about snacking from Dr. Guyanet, which is why we're eating 218 more calories per day. But Dr. Ron Weiss is also a farmer at Ethos Farm in New Jersey, where he's also a medical doctor, where he helps people with the whole food plant-based diet. And one of the things he talked about that was amazing is the havoc that is wreaked on our metabolism by oil. And Dr. Furman talked about that too, about how it just stops weight loss immediately. But he talked about it in terms of how soybeans are the number one crop now, and they're usually genetically modified. And that's usually to make soybean oil, which is the kind of oil you're generally getting when you go to restaurants. So for example, a lot of people think, oh, Chipotle's healthy, I'll get rice and beans on a bowl. Well, guess what? You're getting some genetically modified soybean oil. I mean, first of all, you don't even need oil to cook rice and beans, and that's why you got to be really careful about eating restaurants. But he said that when you have this oil, especially soybean oil, 15% of it is linoleic acid, which is an inflammatory omega-6 fatty acid, which is the parent molecule of arachidonic acid. And he says that what happens is that it binds the inflammatory. See, this is what I'm tired. I'm sorry. You got to listen to this. But he says we have these marijuana-like receptors that it binds to, and it actually causes us to gain weight. So it's not just the caloric density, but of course, you know, the less fiber, the greater the caloric density. Oil is 4,000 calories a pound, but he actually talks specifically how oil makes us gain weight, and it does. And now we know from Dr. Furman it can also cause cancer. So there's really no good reason to be eating oil, especially if you're trying to be healthy or lose weight. Very hard if you're eating at restaurants, though. He talked about something called regenerative standards for farming, which is different than just organic, and that was really interesting. And he talked about how even in young children, they're finding evidence of these pesticides in the urine of young children, and so that we really have to make every effort to eat what he calls unpoisoned food. And of course, you know, we can look at the EWG.org Environmental Working Group and look at the Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen, but he is so convinced that conventional produce is really not good. Better than eating animal products, of course, but that it's so contaminated that he will not even let his children eat a non-organic apple. He says, you got to find the right information and dedicate yourself, and you'll get your dreams. So we hope that this summit has provided the right information for many, if not most of you. And we encourage you to go after your dream. If your dream is to be healthy or maybe lose weight, get on the floor and play with your grandchildren, take a trip that you've been wanting to take, reverse a disease that you've been told is not reversible. So again, he talked about all these endocrine disruptors and how they make us gain weight, and these pesticides, and why it's really important to, if you can't grow your own food, you know, eat organic. I haven't talked much about Dr. Deal, but he was just so charming, and he really understood the history of the obesity epidemic in this country. And that's why his slides, when he showed the chairs, how even our chairs have gotten bigger to accommodate this. And to me, it's sort of like that analogy of the frog in boiling water. If you put a frog in warm water, he'll stay in there. And if you turn it up slowly, he won't notice the increase until he actually boils to death. And to me, that's sort of like the obesity epidemic. It's just been rising and rising and rising since the 70s. And because almost everyone is overweight or obese right now, it's been normalized. And again, it's not to make people feel bad. It is not your fault if you're overweight or obese. You weren't designed for this obesogenic environment. But what's happened is it's grown so slowly that we're at a place now where there's very few lean people left. And it has become so normalized that a lot of people, it's like the frog in boiling water, and it's going to take, you know, almost boiling to death for some people to do something about it. And we hope that this summit will turn up the heat just enough for you to be motivated to realize that there's hope and there's something that you can do. But definitely watch Dr. Deal's presentation, because it is like going to a conference and seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Oh, Dr. Linda Carney, boy, people have been writing in saying, I'm never drinking a cup of coffee again. When you understand that, especially if you're a female, that coffee is not making it easy for you to lose weight. You know, a lot of people think, well, I just have a cup in the morning and I don't put anything in it. Well, if you're overweight, then maybe look at that. You know, it's still a drug. It's an addictive drug. It's a stimulant, and I'm for people recovering from all their addictions, not just sugar, not just flour, not just alcohol. So I've never met anybody who, after a period of detoxification, which you'll go through when you give up coffee, didn't feel better for giving up the drugs, coffee, and alcohol. But it's difficult, and that's how you know it's addictive, because you can't give it up. But it does make a difference, and people that drink that little coffee in the morning have sugar cravings later in the afternoon. So if you wonder why you're craving sugar, maybe look at the caffeine that you're having in the morning and do what Dr. Carney says to do instead, and have beans and greens instead of coffee and croissant. Okay. Dr. Brewer was really fun to talk to. Again, like if I could get a psychiatrist like him, I'd go to a psychiatrist, you know. Instead, I go to a psychologist, Dr. Doug Lyle, who's phenomenal. But I like Dr. Brewer. He seemed like he's very kind. And again, some people got upset because he doesn't preach abstinence. He preaches what works. You have to understand that if you're a clinician, and I'm not really a clinician, but I have worked personally with thousands of people, both privately and in large groups, that you have to understand that not everybody is going to be able to embrace abstinence. It's a good idea if you're an addict, but some people are unwilling to do it, and based on their personality, which is what we learned from Dr. Hawk, some people are just never going to be able to do it. And so what do? We just forget about them and say, you know what? If you can't do Chef AJ and Dr. Goldhammer's plan, then just forget it. Just stay fat, stay sick. No, we have to help everybody based on their personality and what they're willing to do. Abstinence never doesn't work, but the thing is not everyone can do it, and too many people strive for this A+ diet. They fail, they get into what's called the ego trap, and that's even worse than being in the pleasure trap. So you know, people said, well, you know, he's teaching this lady to eat a piece of pepperoni pizza. Well, the lady was binging on entire pepperoni pizzas. Don't you think that if she can eat one piece mindfully now, that is a step in the right direction? Not that I'm endorsing people to eat pepperoni pizza, but again, I am not for everybody. I can only help the people that are willing to do what I can teach. If you can't do it, we got to find something else for you. And mindfulness that's taught by Dr. Brewer and other people might be something that can help you. I know that I could never eat or drink a Slurpee mindfully, or drink a Dr. Pepper mindfully, or eat a vegan chocolate chip cookie mindfully. I can't do that, but I am very, very vulnerable to food addiction. But there are people that might be able to do that, and even if you're not able to do that, there's nothing wrong with putting mindfulness in your toolbox. I know that when I've taken mindfulness classes at UCLA, I've been calmer, I've been able to meditate. Mindfulness is a beautiful thing. It's not the first thing that I recommend. If somebody comes to me 300 pounds with diabetes, I don't say, well, you just have to eat mindfully. No, we get them on the healthiest diet as quick as possible and get rid of the poisons, as Dr. Ron Weiss says. But mindfulness is a great thing, and it really does help to pay attention, because as Dr. Furman said, not overeating actually feels better. Well, if you're not paying attention, you wouldn't know that. So I think his idea of reward-based learning is really good. And if you liked him at all, like I did, he also teaches other things. He's very helpful in helping people with anxiety. He's got a wonderful tool, an app for that. So don't throw out the baby with the bathwater because one speaker said one thing you disagree with. I mean, you know, that's why we have, you know, two flavors of California balsamic vinegar. I have sweet heat and I have curry. Not everybody's going to like all the flavors. So take what you can, you know, and then don't take what doesn't resonate with you. But he had 40% reduction in craving-related eating. You know, he does medical research. He does scientific research in the people that he's worked with, because not everybody's going to be able to subscribe to strict food rules. And I like his idea of how little is enough. How little is enough. But again, for some people with these addictive foods, a little is still going to be too much. That's why we say one bite is too many, 1,000 bites are never enough. So, you know, try it. If it doesn't work for you, you can always go back to a stricter program. And this is where we have that big problem, the pleasure trap versus the ego trap. The diet that's going to help you lose the most weight the quickest and get you out of the pleasure trap is just going to be too strict for too many people at the beginning. The diet that's going to get you out of the ego trap may still include pleasure trap foods and keep you in the pleasure trap. So again, this is one of those chicken and egg things, and this is where your personality is going to come into play. Do the least restrictive diet you can do to get the results you seek. If you don't have those results, you may have to increase your diligence. Dr. Lyle has talked about in the Feel Fabulous Over 40 membership private group, where he talks once a month, that he has a client right now in Australia that's doing a B+ to A- diet and is still 30 pounds overweight. For this gentleman, he's probably going to have to do a stricter version because genetically he has thick genes. So there's a lot to play here, but he says that a lot of what people call emotional eating or this night eating is really not emotional eating. It's a habit loop. And Dr. Lyle says the same thing in his lecture about the cram circuit, and so does Dr. Hawk. It's basically a conditioned response. We say it's emotional eating so that it was like we have an excuse to do it, but really it's a habit loop, and that habit loop can actually be broken. He defined addiction as continued use despite adverse consequences. So, people say, oh, I'm not an addict. It's sort of like Denzel Washington in the movie Flight. I'm not an addict. I'm not an addict. I just choose to drink. So whether you're an addict or not, it really doesn't matter, because the diet we're recommending works beautifully on lifestyle diseases, weight loss, and people that are trying to manage and recover from food addictions. So he says paying attention is one way not to relapse. And so I think it's better if we all pay attention now, You see people driving and texting. That's the exact opposite of what we want to do. So we do, I think, need to be mindful. And he talked about the trigger behavior reward, the dopamine that's released, and we remember where we ate it and where we found it. And that was a survival mechanism. But guess what? We're not in that environment of scarcity anymore, and we are going to survive. And if we've got fat on our body, we've got a lot of reserves, so we don't have to worry about that. Dr. Rosanna Alviera is a master at habit change because she's passionate about it, and she is the one that gave us the saying, the why that makes you cry, which I think is really needed for a lot of people, because if you don't know why you're doing something, or if it doesn't make you cry, so for example, if the why is to look good at my 40th high school reunion, there's a chance that you will not sustain that. She talked about consistent daily habits to keep weight off. Consistent daily habits. What are your consistent daily habits? What are the habits that you need to develop to maintain your weight loss once it occurs? She said that a lot of people say it takes at least 66 days to build a habit for it to become an automatic habit. Some people say it could take more than 200, but think about what your daily consistent habits are right now and what you can create to help facilitate this. And she said that morning habits tend to stick more than evening habits. And I know that's true for me. If I don't exercise in the morning, today I missed my spinning, it ain't going to happen. I can tell you, it never does. So she talked about stacking habits as a way to build habits, which was really fascinating. You'll want to listen or watch that again. And she said that sometimes you need 4 to 5 new habits to break one bad habit, like eliminating sugar. And this is something she gets into great detail about. But again, she understands calorie density, that we don't want to diminish our portions. We want to diminish the amount of calories, and we do that by eating more lower on the calorie density scale. But she says most people have to have an emotional shift to lose weight, and to, or at least permanently. Because she says everybody can lose weight, but most people just can't keep it off. And she said, again, don't label yourself an emotional eater. A lot of our speakers don't believe in emotional eating and food addiction, like Dr. Lyle and Dr. Hawk. She says that just like Dr. Brewer said right before her, that you created a habit with those foods. And she said most people know how to identify the pain they're in, but not what they want. And that's why you want to create the why that makes you cry, and get those habits done early in the morning, especially exercise. But she said it should never be a tool for weight loss. That's not why we do it. But it's important to do for self-esteem, for preventing Alzheimer's, all kinds of reasons. And she said one of the most useful things is to brush your teeth after dinner. and then it makes it much harder to eat something, especially if your breath is minty fresh and medicine-y. It makes that chocolate thing not taste very good. So that's a habit you can start right away, is cleaning the kitchen, brushing your teeth, and you're done. And we learned from so many speakers like Dr. Hans Deal and Dr. Linda Carney that those calories eaten after dinner are going to be stored as fat. And so we want to stop eating at a reasonable hour, whether we're doing intermittent fasting or not. And then we had Dr. Howard Jacobson. And again, he does not teach an abstinence-based approach for everyone. If it works for you, absolutely. That's what I teach. That's, when you're a hammer, you tend to see everything as a nail. And because I'm a food addict in recovery, this is my approach. And it works beautifully for those who can do it. But he understands for his clients, and maybe even for him, some aren't willing to do it. So he has another system that he was able to use. But he explained, just like Dr. Deal, we don't live in a society that supports a healthy weight. And so it's very difficult for those of us that want to be at a healthy weight, because we're being pulled by people that maybe not on purpose want to sabotage us, but often don't feel so good about themselves. And if we try to embrace a healthy diet and, God forbid, lose weight, they now feel like they've lost status and don't feel as good about themselves. But he said the most important part of practice is to learn where you made a mistake and correct it. And so instead of beating yourself up, do what he says social scientist B.J. Fogg teaches, which is turn a bad day into good data. And he said that obesity is the body's response to the environment. Dr. Stefan Guillenet, Dr. Lyle, that is exactly what it is. You weren't created for the environment that your genes are now in. And it's not because you had a bad childhood. It's because you're living in an environment that you were not designed to live in. He said, instead of focusing on what you don't want, like fat on your body, focus on what you do want. And that's why getting that why that makes you cry is going to be so important, because he said motivation can only go so far for behavior change because it only lasts so long. But at the beginning, it is necessary to have some motivation. And that to me is the why that makes you cry. He says the biggest difference is when you have absolutely no motivation and still do it anyway. And I think this is when you get your internal audience to feel very proud of you. He says that cheat days are not a good idea, and he understands Dr. Goldhammer's work with neuroadaptation, because once you get your taste buds under control and reacclimate to health, and then you get that pleasure trap food, it's really hard. It can be a slippery slope, because then your food just doesn't taste good anymore. And he said those of us that eat this way, like Dr. Furman and myself and Dr. Goldhammer, the way we live is ultra pleasurable. Do you think I could have done this for over 8 years if I wasn't in love with my food? My food is delicious, but if you haven't yet neuroadapted, your food is not going to taste the way to you that my food tastes to me. He says we want to chase habits that are positive instead of ones that are negative. And he said, forget about the weight loss. Focus on the habit and build your environmental immune system. Not everybody's going to be able to try to do that clean environment, which is optimal. But he told a story about Cliff Bars and how he was able to have them in his environment. To me, that would be a disaster. I used to love those things, especially the white chocolate chip ones. But again, I would say to everybody, before they give up on the environment, give themselves the gift of a clean environment for 30 days and see what a difference it makes. It makes it so much easier. But again, you have to know yourself. And he said the same thing as Dr. Alviera. Do it in the morning. Morning routines, set yourself up in the best way possible. So that is really important too. And he goes, make your environment such that you don't have to execute willpower. So that's the most important thing. So, if your favorite thing in the whole world is chocolate chip cookies and you're living with chocolate chip cookies, you're going to have to execute willpower every minute to not eat those cookies. So set your environment up so that you don't have to execute willpower. And that willpower is it's a resource that gets easily depleted. It doesn't take any willpower to not eat something that isn't there. And so it's willpower. One way to increase willpower, of course, is with exercise. But again, if you're stressed, your willpower can just go right in the garbage. So set your environment up, build your environmental immune system. Florence Christophers talked about a 3-step process that she uses to help people kick sugar to the curb. It worked for her. It works for her clients. This is not going to be for everybody. Some people thought that this was not for them. And again, don't do it then. But some people thought it was a great idea to use her system, which, she explains in detail about this. But she knew about thylakoids. And again, when people say, oh, I've relapsed, that's the answer. Thylakoids. Next meal, eat those greens, or maybe even drink a green juice. But the thylakoids really, really help with the sugar cravings, especially at the beginning. That's why when I started my Ultimate Weight Loss program 8 years ago, it wasn't actually vegetables for breakfast. It was greens for breakfast. And that was even before I knew this thing about thylakoids shutting off the hunger switch. So she talked about how some people are just genetically sensitive to sugar, and she appealed to the mothers out there to please not give their babies sugar, because it's so hard, especially if you are genetically sensitive. I think Joel Fuhrman talks about this a lot in his book, Disease Proof Your Child and Fast Food Genocide. For those that are vulnerable to the effects of food addiction and sugar addiction, giving it to us young, like my mother did to me, it just sets us up for a lifetime of struggle and obesity. And I know the parents aren't doing it on purpose, but nobody needs to eat sugar, guys. And we'll learn more about that from what Dr. Pam Peek says. She said that a lot of people think we're crazy for not eating sugar or flour or alcohol, but basically we're just eating the way that our ancestors ate throughout most of human history. And she said that everybody is unfortunately going to have to go through a detox when they change their diet, so be aware of that, but it doesn't have to last very long, especially if you're flooding your cells with these thylakoids and eating whole natural food in abundance. And if you can't do it alone, go to a place like the True North Health Center in an environment of rest, or the McDougall 10-day program, and you can do it. So who else did we talk to that day? Oh, Dr. Esser. Yeah, so he's also very, very compassionate and loving, and he could have been a preacher, I think, if he wasn't a Harvard-educated surgeon. What's so interesting about him is that it's something that's not talked about a lot, the joints. It's so common these days for people to get knee replacements and hip replacements, but if people lost weight, the incidence of those surgeries would decrease. I know that my impetus, the why that made me cry 8 years ago, was I didn't want to have surgery. I'm afraid of surgery. I almost died from an anesthetic once when I was 19 years old. And I am really, that is my, it's a fear I have. It's more than a fear. It's like it's something that I'm just so deathly afraid of. And he talked about, what it's doing to our joints. A lot of people you see with wheelchairs and walkers, and you go to the grocery store these days, and it's because they can't walk anymore. And for every pound you're overweight, it's at least 5 pounds to your joints. So if you've got a lot of weight to lose, any amount you lose, it's just going to make such a difference to your joints. And think about it, we're not supposed to have to keep replacing body parts, guys. We're supposed to, Dr. McDougall says, live at least 85 years. And so this whole idea that we need a new hip or a new knee, I mean, of course, I'm sure there's people with certain sports that had to have it for that reason that weren't overweight. But you have to realize that being overweight is not just how you look, it's all these diseases, cancer, diabetes, joint disease, autoimmune disease. We want you to be healthy, and losing weight is going to help you be healthier. And he is just such an inspiring guy to listen to. The Shirzais, wow, mind-blowing. $540 billion spent on Alzheimer's. 75.8 million people have it, 2/3 of them women. They talked about exercise, strenuous exercise. We have to do it 30 minutes a day, at least 5 days a week. We have to get tired. We have to sweat, like we learned from Dr. Chen. We got to release those toxins. He goes, we've got to create an environment where we move throughout the day, because just exercising 30 minutes and then sitting 23 hours and 30 minutes is not enough. But I loved how they said that leg strength is correlated with brain strength, because as a spinner, that's the exercise that I'm actually doing the most of. Bigger legs, bigger brain. And this BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, is most affected by leg strength. They said, don't retire, rewire. They are great. I'm actually going to be meeting them, I think, in April, so I am very excited to do that. And he says, even though you don't feel the effect of of what you eat right away. Every single meal can build a brain or bake a brain. It's a cumulative process. And they talked about how omega-3 fatty acids are plentiful in whole plant foods. We don't need salmon. We don't need fish oil because fat damages our arteries. He says, just skip the fish, get it from where the fish gets it, which is the algae. And that all the studies that showed that fish and salmon and fish oil were favorable, compared it to meat and processed food, not to plants. They said we are certainly living longer but not healthier, and that in general we don't address brain health. He said without good nutrition you can run all day long and nothing will happen, But they said that when you exercise, it pushes the brain to make more connections and creates brain growth hormones, which improves brain capacity. And, to me, as bad as cancer is, a lot of people recover from it, but Alzheimer's, I don't see recovery. They sometimes can slow the progression, but I don't see so far it being reversed. So that is not one disease we want to get. And guess what? The more overweight you are, the more predisposed you are to that as well. And they talked about how they're seeing 2-year-olds with lower IQ from eating these sugary cereals and processed foods, and that inflammation in young and children as 12. And they said that grain brain is junk science. Grain brain is junk science, and that foods that are good for the brain are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Foods that are bad for the brain, meat, cheese, dairy products, and saturated fat. Dr. Roy Artal, I had the privilege of being his patient while I lived in LA. I'm so sad to not have him anymore because he was quadruple board certified. He's a sleep specialist, a pulmonologist, an internal medicine doctor, and actually an ER doctor as well, although he's not doing that right now. And he talked about how sleep disorders like sleep apnea are much more prevalent in overweight and obese populations, and that many of his patients, once they lost weight, were able to resolve it completely and not have to wear that uncomfortable mask at night. But that there's an actual correlation between people that don't sleep enough and obesity. And that's why we have to make sleep a priority. Like Dr. Goldhammer says, diet, sleep, and exercise. After you do that, if you have enough time, then you go to work. They said that exercise makes us sleep better. And there's nothing wrong with taking a short nap after lunch, like other countries do a siesta, but that it needs to be about 15 to 20 minutes. Otherwise, you can develop what's called sleep inertia and not feel invigorated. He said alcohol is not a friend of sleep. It's a neurotoxin. It helps you fall asleep fast, but it leads to an awakening in 2 to 3 hours. He said his advice to his patients is that no amount of alcohol is safe because it is a carcinogen. He said the greater the separation between your last meal and going to sleep, the better. So this is not only good for your gut health, but it's good for not gaining weight because we know those calories eaten after dinner are stored as fat, and it's also going to be better for sleep. And he says caffeine has a very long half-life, 17 hours, I believe, and so that little cup of coffee in the morning can still affect you at night. He said, like Dr. Lyle has once said, that there's really no such thing as night owls, that if you are a night owl, that is a behavioral problem, and that when you're sleep deprived, you depress your leptin levels and increase your ghrelin levels, and that even what he sees a lot in his asthmatic patients are excess weight, that you increase your risk of all lung disease when you have extra weight on your body. I think one of the most fascinating things he shared was that when they did studies of people in a sleep-deprived state, even though in a calorie-restricted state, they lost lean muscle mass as opposed to fat. And speaking of fat, Dr. Rick Dina gave us the Skinny on Fat, where he talked about how it's easier to stay lean with more carbohydrate than fat, and that we don't have to worry so much about our omega-3 fatty acids if we're eating enough vegetables, especially greens. He said our ancestors didn't eat oil, but yet they somehow survived to reproduce. And he looked at my omega-3 fatty acid blood tests that I get every year. They increase every year, and I haven't eaten any nuts or seeds or added fat for over 8 years. But I do eat a lot of greens, just like Robbie does, Robbie Barbero, who had his blood tests looked at, and his results are favorable. But if you're worried, you can certainly take a tablespoon of flaxseed every day on your salad. You can get your omega-3 fatty acid levels tested. But he talked about how weight loss really does take commitment, and that he also recommends calorie density, where you fill up with the right amount of calories without worrying about portion control. And you do this by eating a low-food, whole-food, plant-based diet. So he echoed everything Robbie and Cyrus said about insulin resistance and sensitivity, and that you can handle the carbohydrates from fruit when you no longer have diabetes or insulin sensitivity. And he said, let's see, he said all fruit is an all fruit diet would be deficient in essential fatty acids, so we need to have vegetables too. And he said it's so much easier to optimize your calorie intake when you eat a low-fat diet or a moderate-fat diet. And he says that when you overconsume calories, you increase free radical production and you actually rev up the aging process. And that keto is based on a fake premise that carbs raise blood sugar and make you fat, yet people lose weight on a low-fat, whole-food, plant-based diet. So again, just make sure you're eating lots and lots of greens, and then you don't have to worry about those omegas, but always, if you are, an ounce of nuts and seeds is fine. It's just that a lot of people that have food addictions, we can't do that. So get your levels tested, eat a lot of greens. And he said one of the things that happens when you lose weight is that you feel proud of yourself and you feel accomplished. And that's that whole idea of the internal audience that Dr. Lyle and Dr. Hawk talk about. Darshana was a queen of making low-fat, nutrient-rich recipes easy and delicious. That's why we like you to try the Forks Over Knives 2-week free meal plan and see her wonderful recipes. But one of the things that she does that makes it so easy is she also does batch cooking. She may have her own system, but if you notice what she showed you in the cooking demo, she didn't have to make the rice or the beans or the vegetables. Everything was prepped, and that's going to be one of the secrets to your long-term success is to have the food ready. If you can't, there's Mama Says for emergencies. Having a few bags of that in the freezer are great. But again, having that food ready, and she showed you how to do that. Dr. Columbus Batiste, cardiologist, again, loving, compassionate person, talked about the inequality of the food, that the people that can afford it the least are targeted with the worst food. And he talks about stress too, how some people, even when they eat a good diet, he had a patient that had a heart attack just from stress. And so we've got to find ways to decrease stress. And guess what? When we eat a healthier diet, we're less stressed, but also exercise. That keeps coming back. Exercise really helps increase willpower, decrease stress, helps you sleep better, helps prevent Alzheimer's, not to lose weight, but all the other wonderful benefits. Dr. John McDougall, my hero, said you don't need a PhD in biochemistry to understand what he's teaching. He said if you eat the way he recommends, a starch-based diet, you will be trim. If you eat a lot of fat, you'll have a problem. And he mentioned all the people that work in the McDougall program that eat this way that are all trim. And he says starches do not make you fat. Potatoes have only 1 calorie a gram, and it's very difficult to convert carbohydrate to fat. That's called de novo lipogenesis. Pigs can do it. Human beings, not so efficient. He said it is safe to eat a diet with no overt fats because you can't eat a fat-free diet. Think about it. Oats have almost 20% of their calories from fat. Even greens have 3% of their calories from fat. He says people cannot violate the laws of thermodynamics. And he says when you focus your diet on unrefined starches, that is optimal. And we get to eat a lot more food than most folks do, which is why it's such an enjoyable way of eating. And that unless you find a meal plan that provides you with satisfaction, you won't succeed. And nothing is as satisfying as starches. Starch is to the hunger drive what oxygen is to the breathing drive. And I think one of the reasons that I see people fail miserably in gaining their weight back on weighing and measuring programs isn't even so much that they're getting less food, it's that they're told not to eat any starch or 4 ounces a day. I eat 4 pounds of starch a day and I'm lean. Starch is what makes you happy and full. Fruits and vegetables are great, but you need that starch. You need most of your calories to come for that if you want to be successful long term. Dr. Stéphane Guillonet gave a wonderful PowerPoint presentation, which I really encourage you to watch rather than to just listen to, because he had some incredible slides and he understood that our brains were programmed when foods were scarce. And that's why we are overeating 218 calories more a day now, and it's as snacks between meals, not so much at meals. But he said since the 70s, this is when the obesity epidemic started. Now 38% of Americans are obese and more than 70% are overweight. And he talked about how excess body fat impacts more than health, although the purpose of this summit was to try to teach you that it's not just an aesthetic thing, is that your predisposition for all diseases, cancers, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune disease is exponentially increased with every pound. He said there's more to it than that. Self-esteem. A lot of people care more about their appearance than their health. So being overweight impacts more than a person's health. He says that our brains push us to overeat in certain contexts. And there's a clash between the ancient hardwiring of our brain circuits, which operate outside our awareness, that evolved to help us survive and reproduce, and the modern food environment, which we weren't designed for. So he talked about the seductiveness of food, how they call to us, ice cream versus celery, and how our ancestors didn't have these foods. And for us, they drive our brains crazy because these modern foods cause too much dopamine in our brain, and it leads to an obsessive drive to keep consuming food. Like they say, Lay's potato chips, bet you can't eat just one. And the modern foods are not very filling, and so we have to overeat to feel full. He talked about fullness per calorie. This is like the idea of calorie density. Because there's no fiber in these processed foods, we have to overeat even to feel a little bit of stretch. And he talked about the work of Dr. Susanna Holt, how the least filling food is croissant and the most filling food is the potato. And all the doctors are telling you, even the one that created the glycemic index, that it's okay to eat potatoes. It's what you put on them that you got to be careful. So how filling a food is by unit calorie, this idea of fullness per calorie, this is just like calorie density. And you can reduce your calories without going hungry when you pay attention to calorie density, which the amount of fiber in the food. And he also talked about palatability and protein. He goes, the more the foods have the more a food draws us in, generally the more it fills us up less. And the foods that most Americans are eating in order have high seductiveness but low satiety. These are grain-based desserts, cookies, cakes, crackers, things like that, cupcakes, then bread, then chicken dishes, then soda and energy drinks, which he calls sugar water, then pizza, and then alcoholic beverages. He said once we gain fat, it's very hard to lose, as Dr. Sylvia Tara explained to us, because now our brain wants to hang on to it. So the best thing we could do is not get overweight in the first place. But that doesn't mean that if you are, that it's fatal, because we can help you get that weight off. So once you start to trigger that release of dopamine by eating these hyperpalatable hedonic foods, he says it's like an avalanche. He goes, weight control comes down to calorie intake. You can do this with any foods, but it's easier when you eat the foods that are conducive to that, which are these voluminous, nutrient-dense foods. And again, just like the other doctors, choosing a supportive food environment. Focus on the principles. Eat foods that are mainly unprocessed or minimally processed. And you don't want your food hyperpalatable or too delicious. Dr. Furman talked about how when you salt your food, you eat more food, but even salt-free spices. And it's not that your food doesn't have to taste good, but if it tastes too good, Dr. Goldhammer says, then spit it out. He said people do not realize how many calories they're eating, especially from fat. And he talked about how a mere teaspoon of oil has 40 calories, which is why you could literally go to a restaurant, like Dr. Roberts said, eat 500 calories from oil that you're not aware of because you don't feel it and you don't control for it the next day. But he says you control your food environment. Unsupported food cues make it a lot harder. I would say unsupported people do as well, to eat the way you want to eat. Because if you don't have a supportive food environment, you're always going to be fighting yourself and exerting willpower. And we know that willpower is a very short-lived commodity. He says it's better to exert willpower before you're in that situation. And the most tempting things, you don't want them there at all. He said the whole point in losing weight is to have a better life, which is why this is called Better Life Summits, because that's really what we want for you, is to feel good in your body and be free of the diseases that we have lost so many of our loved ones to. Dr. Walt Willett talked about the environment, just like Dr. McDougall did, and how we're not going to have a planet one of these days if we keep eating meat It's just very sad. But he also talked about how obesity is contagious, just like Dr. Jean Ornish did. Some people got mad about that, saying, well, should we not hang out with overweight people? Of course not. That's not what he's saying. But if you're hanging out with overweight people is going to the pizza parlor, then maybe you want to change how you hang out with them and maybe suggest a walk or a play or something that doesn't involve, going to the bar for, beer and wings. So of course we don't, we don't shame or blame, but he's trying to explain that obesity really is a contagious disease because we're more likely to be overweight or obese, Dr. Ornish says, if our friend's friend is overweight or obese than even if our direct family member who has the same genetics is. The idea is that this is a contagious disease because our diet is heavily influenced by those around us. And so it's not to say you don't hang out with overweight people at all. It's just to be aware of this and so that we can change it. Because look, in Japan, the obesity rate is 5%. In the United States, it's 40%. Because with the Japanese women, it is just not okay with them to be overweight. And we've made it so, and again, we don't want to, this whole fat acceptance thing, it's not that we don't want to accept people for being fat, but we have made it so acceptable that now thin people are being shamed because almost everybody is overweight or obese. But the problem is with this 40% obesity rate, our longevity has greatly decreased, whereas in Japan, it has gone up right now by 6 years and it is skyrocketing. And this is the first generation that became overweight as children, and now they're experiencing all the consequences. He talked about how sugar-sweetened beverages, red meat, refined carbohydrates are part of the problems. Dr. Deal talked about that as well. And I think my favorite takeaway from him is that if you can't distinguish a bowl of salad from a bowl of sugar, you shouldn't be making our dietary guidelines, but that's exactly who's making it right now. Ramses Bravo showed us how to make delicious salad dressings by layering flavor because he understands, as a former executive chef at a hotel who cooked regular food for people, that in order to make food taste good without sugar, oil, and salt, you have to do other things like hit other flavors, the other taste buds, the sweet, the sour, the bitter, the taste buds, the umami. And he showed you how to do that with 2 delicious salad dressings. And he's also a weight loss success story himself. He lost 50 pounds just by changing his environment. The environment from a hotel chef using lots of fat and meat to the executive chef at True North using no sugar, no oil, no salt. He didn't take the job to be lean. He took it to spend more time with his young daughter, and he ended up losing 50 pounds. I've never seen anybody not go to True North and not lose an extraordinary amount of weight. The place is just incredible. So for those of you that have given up hope, think about that. Yeah, I forgot to mention about Dean Ornish, how you can actually undo this, with the science of epigenetics. Yes, genetics loads the gun, but our lifestyle pulls the trigger. And what we eat and how we think and how we move and how we love. Dr. Ornish is also very, very inspiring, by the way. And again, he's somebody that really understands calorie density because he wrote a book about it called Eat More, Weigh Less. And so Chef Bravo showed us these recipes that have no added fat that will make your salads taste delicious. And he's just a wonderful chef and a wonderful person. And he's fun to watch. And ladies, he's single as far as I know. So on the last day of the summit, we had the very, very fun Dr. Michael Greger, and he talked about this notion of thylakoids that we talked about earlier with Florence and a few other speakers, and that he figured out through his research that these thylakoids, which are in green leafy vegetables, which I've been recommending for 8 years people eat as breakfast, last for hours in our GI tract, because they bind to an enzyme called lipase, which slows fat absorption, unlike oil, which facilitates fat absorption. He says this slows down our appetite, decreases cravings, and accelerates weight loss. So again, is there nothing kale cannot do? He recommends 2 teaspoons of vinegar with every meal, and with California balsamics that we've awarded so many of you prizes with, it's going to make it even easier to get those 2 teaspoons in because they come in so many delicious flavors. And he talked about how sugar and salt rev up your appetite, just like Dr. Furman said, and that when they did studies with Fruit Loops versus Cheerios, even though they were exactly the same amount of calories, the kids ate way more Fruit Loops because it was so much higher in sugar. He talked also about sensory-specific satiety, like Dr. Rolls did, how variety encourages overeating, and that the potato is the most satiating food that's ever been tested. And he said that restriction will not work. That's what, according to the research, the weighing and measuring programs do not work over the long term because people cannot stick to something that makes them chronically hungry. And he recommends meal timing, front loading those calories using caloric density, eating, the soup, the salad, the fruit first, and eating more of the food earlier in the day, like many of our speakers did that believe in the intermittent fasting. He says we live in a toxic food environment where a calorie is not a calorie and that obesity is not a moral failure. He said that alcohol is a carcinogen and that less than one drink a day, greatly increases the risk of cancer, especially women and especially breast cancer. He said that permanent weight loss requires permanent dietary change. And when Dr. Jenkins said we need to help people that are overweight, how do we help them? Dr. Greger says we don't sabotage them. If you are somebody that is in an unclean environment, you have to understand that if your loved ones will not support you, then they're sabotaging you because they can't be both supportive and unsupportive at the same time. Dr. Jen Hawk, another success story at True North. It's funny, we had 7 speakers on the summit that either currently work at True North or used to work at True North, and many more that actually went to True North. And Dr. Hawk has lost close to 100 pounds now, being, as she says, an imperfect whole food plant-based SOS-free eater. And she talked about how food and sex unleash an appropriate amount of dopamine in the brain for survival, but supernormal food hijacks the pleasure pathway. And it's like an addictive-like response. But with whole natural foods, there is no addictive-like response. And she says there's a continuum of addictive-like properties with these foods, so that we have to create a plan based on our personality. That's why Dr. Brewer and Florence's work may be helpful to some people that just can't do the abstinence-based approach. She says if you are not highly conscientious, abstinence may not work for you, and that's why you have to know your personality. And if you need to learn more about this, you can go to Dr. Lyle on YouTube and learn about the perfect personality. But she did say, same thing that Dr. Lyle said, environment is the key piece. When you get your environment correct, this is helpful to any problem that you're facing, not just the pleasure trap. I loved her sayings about unicorns flying out of your butt. I don't know why, that tickled me so much. I've never heard that before. She says your survival instincts are always trying to get you to eat the richest food in the environment. And when it comes to hyperpalatable food, we're just like lab rats that refuse to eat for 14 days when they no longer could get their hyperpalatable food. But before they were exposed to it, they were perfectly happy with rat chow, the diet that was consistent with their species' natural history. She says you need to get your diet clean enough to get out of the pleasure trap. But for some people, they'll get into the ego trap if they strive too much for perfection. And she said, just like Rosanne Alviera and Dr. Brewer, who said this emotional eating is really just a habit, she said a craving is just a conditioned response. And look up the work of Dr. Lyle called the cram circuit, and you'll figure out how to break that. She goes, it's not supposed to be easy, and you're supposed to be uncomfortable, but the rewards are definitely worth it. And she reiterated, like so many of the other speakers, that willpower is a limited resource. You fortify your environment so you don't have to rely on willpower. If it's not in the environment, you can't eat it. And that's why environment is king. Dr. Pam Peake talked about when you continue to eat hyperpalatable foods, you decrease the dopamine receptors in your brain and you build up a tolerance. So you're eating these things no longer to feel good, but just not to feel bad. She says you don't need to feel defeated, helpless, or hopeless. She said she's never met anyone who ate an apple and said, oh my God, I need to eat 85 more apples. And now I'm filled with shame and guilt and I have to hide in the closet. She said that's how you know whether you're eating what she calls these bingeable foods or not. She says once your brain has been exposed to something, you'll never forget it. That's what Dr. Guillenette said as well. And for for our ancestors, this was really important when they found food, but not so much for us now when we're finding these hyperpalatable and hedonic treats. She said that inflammation is the foundation of almost all disease, and sugar and flour and alcohol and processed food are the most inflammatory foods you can eat. I would add dairy to that list as well. She also, like Dr. Greger and Dr. Deal, Dr. Carney, promotes intermittent fasting. Dr. Goldhammer does as well, where you have at least 12 hours of non-feeding beginning at a reasonable dinner eating. Again, everyone is saying we have to stop after dinner eating. She says, learn how to taste and savor. This is very similar to the mindful approach of Dr. Judd Brewer. And she goes, you can learn to enjoy non-bingeables, the whole natural foods that we recommend, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. She goes, you know that it's a bingeable if you feel shame, blame, guilt, or out of control after you eat it. And she says that you don't, she did an analogy with Jerry Seinfeld, one of the most successful stand-up comedians of all time, who writes every day. And he says, I don't write well every day, but I do write every day. And she says that you need to practice every day these habits. To be successful, you don't break a link in the chain. So you do something every day. And one of the things she really recommends is exercise, because like the Shirzais, she says that it creates more of these neurons. She goes, every step you take is a walk is a step towards recovery. And I like how she said we should start our days with gratitude. That's great. And she says exercise also reduces your stress hormones. So we're talking, a lot of people say they eat because they're stressed. Well, how much are you exercising? And again, we want to do that first thing in the day. That's when habits are the most successful. I think one of the most favorite things she said is success only comes before work in the dictionary. So there is going to be some work involved, because if you want to change your life, you're going to have to change your lifestyle. Josh LaJohny, even my sister wrote me how much she liked him. She had never heard of him before, and he is an inspiration, especially for those of you that have a lot of weight to lose, because we know that if you have 10 or 20 pounds, it's going to take a lot less time than if you are over 200 pounds. And in his case, he was over 400 pounds. And I know some of you that have written in are over 400 pounds. And I hope that Josh LaJohny gave you hope. You don't have to necessarily be on the cover of Runner's Magazine, but he was able to do it living in an environment of Cajun cooking and lots of family members with obesity and diseases. And yeah, it wasn't easy at first, but man, he is just a testimonial that you can make huge changes and be successful no matter what. And I think part of his success was that he had loving support. He had an incredible wife that loved him fat and thin and saw him through, and still does. And, you know, if you don't have loving people in your life, that, again, that's your environment. And sometimes you got to get rid of some of the people in your environment. People can be as toxic as the food. And one of you wrote in that you're getting a divorce after 35 years. And that's how you're able to lose 200 pounds, by getting rid of him. So congratulations on that. You know who you are, and on starting your new life. You know, Josh, like other speakers have said, it's simple. It's not easy, and we understand that. But he said, instead of making your stomach littler with gastric bypass, which is what he was considering, you need to make your food bigger. And again, it really does come down to calorie density. And Dr. Lyle basically told us what we need to do to be successful. He talked about evolutionary psychology and why we often don't do why we know what we should do. And man, he's one of the most brilliant, probably the most brilliant person I've ever met. And, you know, honestly, if I knew he was in a summit, even if it was on a different subject, I would buy the summit just to hear this talk, because he's never given it anywhere else. And so those are my takeaways. And so I hope you'll consider listening to it again, gleaning more knowledge, sharing it with people you love. And if you get the summit before midnight Pacific time, you'll get a buddy pass, which means it's like half price, and you can make a difference in somebody else's life and in the lives of many people that we are gifting this summit to that can't afford it due to disability or income. And that's our mission, is to share this work with as many people as possible. So I'm tired. I have to give a lecture now too, huh? Okay.
Story, no?
I get it. Oh. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. If you look at me now, you'll go, oh, she's just a skinny bitch. What does she know? Well, I wasn't always. I'm probably still a bitch to some people, but I certainly wasn't always skinny. I wish I had photos to show you. I had no idea this was going to be my job growing up. And if I did, I would be a successful blogger with a successful YouTube channel showing the before and afters. But I was just a regular person. And I was in the Northridge earthquake in 1995, and a pipe broke in the apartment building I lived in, which means that my building was red tagged and everything in there was destroyed. So I had nothing. And I mean, I had some clothes, but I lost everything. And one of the things I lost, unfortunately, was all my photos, because when photos are wet, back then we didn't have the technology. We had to put things on discs. So I don't have photos to prove it. I have a pair of shorts to show it, but I was fat since the age of 5. I became obese at 11. When I was 11 years old, that was 1971, I weighed 160 pounds. And when you're not 5 feet tall, that's actually obese. And so, now 1 out of every 3 children under the age of 18 is obese. But in 1960, there was only 1 in every class, and that was me, until at least college. And then again, college happened in the 70s, which is when we started seeing a bigger prevalence of people being overweight or obese. So I stayed overweight or obese my entire life until the age of 52. When I learned this information, I had 2 bouts with thinness, very fleeting. In my teens, I had anorexia, for which I was hospitalized and actually ended up attempting suicide because I became bulimic, and that to me was worse, to be fat than to be, than to be alive. I would rather be dead than to be fat again, because I had been quite thin when I was anorexic, and then, that is not a good strategy for weight loss, by the way. I don't recommend it, and the way they treated it in the 70s was really, really barbaric by today's standards. And then I had fleeting success with thinness once again in my 30s, when I was given fen-phen because I had a knee injury, and I lost weight very quickly down to what I weigh now, which is my ideal weight, I believe, because I've been there so long. And they took it off the market because many people had heart-lung defects, and as soon as the last traces of drugs left my body, so did my newfound thinness. And I just assumed that the set point theory was correct, that I was destined to be fat like everyone in my family who was either obese or morbidly obese, and my weight just kept going back to about 160, 165 pounds is what I weighed when I was 11. By the way, in my 20s, I did get up to 200 pounds. So, I come from, as Dr. Lai would say, thick, sturdy genes. I'm 4th generation obese. I remember when I was 4 years old, my great grandma, we called her Bubby, she had her leg amputated from diabetes. My grandma lost her sight. My mom had dementia, and she was morbidly obese. And my dad died from my dad was not obese. He was actually probably not even considered overweight by today's standards, but he died from failed open heart surgery. And my brother died from complications of obesity. And the thing is, people, how smart you are does not determine your ability to solve this problem, because my brother was one of the smartest people I know. He was number 1 in his graduating class at Princeton University. He was a medical doctor, and he would buy my book for his colleagues and say, look, I know you're right, I just can't do it. And this is before I understood that some people are addicted to food. And unfortunately, he developed type 2 diabetes, which unfortunately caused him to develop heart disease. And when you're a male in your 60s, that's a risk factor for acquiring pancreatic cancer. And he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer on his 60th birthday, was the day that the doctor called him, and he was dead within 3 months. He actually bled to death in his living room in front of his children from this disease. And it's very, very sad. And I'm going to be 60 in a few weeks. And I dedicate this summit to my brother, and to all those of you that grew up suffering from obesity and failed diets. It doesn't have to be this way. We have the answer. And I don't want you to lose any more family members, because I've lost all of mine except for one sister. And I don't want you to be another statistic.
Is there another slide? Yeah. Oh, yeah. So also, people think, oh, food addiction, it's just, it's not as serious as drug addiction or alcoholism. People don't die of it. Yeah. I tried to commit suicide on April 1st, 1980 because of it, because I didn't have any answers and there was nobody that understood when I told the doctor, why can't I stop? I ate entire cakes. We had this bakery in Studio City called Webby's, and I would eat an entire cake. And I couldn't stop. And I would tell my doctor, he goes, oh, there's no such thing as sugar addiction, as he would drink his Diet Cokes. So people do die from food addiction, maybe not as quickly as they do from meth or heroin or things like that. But those of you that have it know what I'm talking about, that there are times you would rather be dead than have to keep living with, as Dr. Peak says, shame, blame, and guilt, because you just can't stop eating these foods. And it's not your fault. This is a biogenetic disease. And I know that more people will understand this soon, like Dr. Tarman, who's working really hard to get it into the DSM so that it's something that can be compensated for, so that physicians can treat it. What she says, Dr. Tarman, is that it's basically a dopamine deficiency disorder. And there's people that don't have this don't understand. People that can drink a beer and not drink another beer don't understand how alcoholics can't do that. And people that are not addicted to these refined carbohydrates don't understand why we can't just have, one cookie or a little bit of peanut butter. My rock bottom happened, I thought my rock bottom was when I tried to commit suicide. Well, I didn't try. I did try, and I was not successful, thank goodness. But when I was in a wheelchair, so I was humiliated, because when I broke my knee a few weeks before my 50th birthday 10 years ago, slipping on a wet floor where they had not put a sign in an office building, I went to the emergency room and they gave me crutches, and I couldn't use the crutches because I was too fat. And I had never exercised, so I had no upper body strength. And I knew they were looking at me like that because I was 50 pounds heavier, and they looked at me with disgust, like, they didn't say it, but it's like, he was very, emergency room doctors are not known for their compassion. And so then he gave me a walker, and I still couldn't use it. So I had to be in a wheelchair for over 3 months. And because of the way my apartment was built, I couldn't even use the toilet, and I had to have help with basic things like bathing, going to the bathroom. And it was embarrassing because I wasn't even 50 years old, and I was trapped in a wheelchair, and I was pathetic, and I felt sorry for myself. And I vowed that when I got out of the chair that I was going to do something about this. And I remember when my knee was healing, I had gone to a couple of different orthopedic surgeons because I was recommended to have surgery. And as you know, I'm afraid of surgery because I almost died from an allergic reaction to an anesthetic when I was a teenager. And so I developed an exaggerated fear of doctors and anesthesia in general. And one of the doctors had said to me, have you ever thought about losing weight? Because every pound you're overweight is 5 to 10 pounds of additional pressure to your knee. And I felt like saying, no, it never crossed my mind. But for some reason, when he said it like that, and here I was 50 pounds overweight, which was really 250 pounds to my knee, it kind of, something really sunk in. And at the time, once I was able to walk again, my job was a pastry chef, which, by the way, if you're a food addict, environment, I don't recommend doing that. There's an old saying, don't get high on your own supply. And once I understood food addiction and had treatment for it, I immediately quit my job because I realized I couldn't be in that environment if I wanted to be successful. But I say that because as a chef, you're standing sometimes 12 or 14 hours a day, and they give you those little pads like cashiers use. But I would come home from work and my left my left leg was twice as big as my right leg, and it really, really hurt. And I really just got tired of being in pain. And then I met the secret weapon. Well, there's actually 3 secret weapons in my opinion, but I met them in this order. And the first was Dr. Doug Lisle. I went to the True North Health Center in January of 2011. And I didn't actually go there to lose weight. I went there to get off psychiatric medicine, which I was embarrassed to take, which really wasn't working. That's a whole nother story. But I went there for that reason, to hopefully water fast and get off these drugs. But unfortunately, they don't fast you when you're on psychiatric medicine. So I was 165 pounds in January of 2011.
that's almost 50 pounds more than I weigh now, but I wasn't there for my weight. But I happened to have a session with Dr. Lyle because I had always been a fan of him in the book, The Pleasure Trap. And to me, it was just extraordinary that we live in a world today where you can read somebody's book and actually meet them. And he basically said to me, when I told him the reason I was fat, I had a history of trauma and abuse and blah, blah, blah. And, and he basically kind of shot trauma theory right out the door when he explained to me that I wasn't fat because I had trauma or mental problems, but because I had math problems. And it was there at True North that I really understood caloric density, because I had Dr. Roll's book, but when Dr. Goldhammer gave his lecture, he made it so understandable. And, even meeting him in January of 2011, it still took me a whole year to really understand it and implement it. But it made me feel better that I didn't have, maybe I do have mental problems, but that wasn't the reason that I was overweight. It was because I didn't understand calorie density. I was doing things like having green smoothies in the morning. And Dr. Lyle taught me that if I were to take all the ingredients in the smoothie, in the blender, and instead of blending it, eat it, I tried that, and guess what? I couldn't finish it. So it was really understanding caloric density, sequencing meals, and it was very easy to do at True North because it's set up in order of increasing caloric density. So they feed you the way they teach you. The thing is caloric density has never not worked. And the picture on the left was taken in 2003. I remember because I was an activity director at a retirement home, and we went to an animal sanctuary. And that was me at 165 pounds. I was a size 14 to 16. The picture on the right was taken in 2000 and what year was that? It was 2013. And I was about 10 pounds heavier than I am now, about 127 there. And caloric density, eat more, weigh less. It's just great. I can eat as much as I want, whenever I want. Doesn't matter when I'm eating, why I'm eating. It only matters what I'm eating. And when you understand what to eat, it doesn't matter why. Well, when it matters a little bit. You don't want to eat after dinner, but for the most part, you don't have to worry about, only eating at exactly, these same times like they tell you at the weighing and measuring program. So yeah, it's been quite amazing that it's been actually easy once I understood it. A lot of people understand calorie density and they understand what they need to do to lose weight, but they still aren't able to be successful long term. And one of the things I thought about on this recent trip to Mexico at Rancho La Puerta are the people that have not yet been successful. And I say not yet because I do believe that everybody has the ability to be successful, more successful than they are now, and perhaps even successful long term. In my book, The Secrets to Ultimate Weight Loss, I wrote a chapter called The 7 C's to Success, where I talked about characteristics that people that were successful had in common, like commitment, compliance, consistency. And these things were true, but I realized these were more theoretical things. These weren't actual actions. These weren't habits. And the longer I've been doing this, and I've been started working with people as a chef in 2000 and as a coach till 2008, and weight loss specifically the last 8 years, is I like to follow up on people. And I like to not only look at the people that have been successful, but the ones that have not yet been successful. But I have found the ones that have been successful, for whom it's pretty easy, have some habits in common that are different than the ones that are not yet successful. And I think about that book by Stephen Covey that they always have every time I go to Costco, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I realized that the people that are highly effective losers have some things in common. And that's not to say that you have to do everything on this list to be successful, but I just want you to be aware of them so that you know that these are what some of the people that have been successful are doing. And again, you may not be able to do any of them or all of them, but I want you to be aware of them. And again, it's not a question of if you can do it, it's how bad do you want it. But you have to realize that if you're going to change, you have to do something different than you're doing now. Because if you always do what you've always done, you've always get what you've always gotten. And you can't expect a different result if you're just doing the same behavior. So I'd like you to take a moment and focus. Focus to me is an acronym. Follow one course until successful. And the people that have followed this course, they have been successful. And some of my clients have literally lost 100 to 300 pounds and have kept them off as long as I have now. So
So one of the habits I notice they have in common, and if you listen to many of the speakers on the summit, they say the same thing, which is eat rather simply. And that doesn't mean sweet potatoes and broccoli every day for lunch like me if you don't like it. It doesn't mean brown rice and broccoli every day, although Dr. McDougall said we can certainly do that and be healthy. But that means that notion of sensory specific satiety, which encourages you to overeat. The more choices you offer yourself at every meal, the more you're going to exponentially overeat. The more you spice your food, even with yummy things that are compliant, like Benson's Table Tasty and California balsamics and hot sauce, even if it's SOS free, the more you're going to overeat. And if that's something like vegetables, that might be a good thing. I have a saying, bland is grand and plain is sane. And, these people do these potato diets, which, I think that's fine. I think a vegetable and potato diet would be better. But then they're putting on hot sauce and they're putting on barbecue sauce with sugar and salt and sriracha sauce with sugar and salt and tree sauce with nutritional yeast. I mean, that defeats the whole purpose to me of doing a potato cleanse. You want bland is grand, plain is sane. And you know what? When you really neuroadapt, when you stop eating sugar, oil, and salt, you can eat a piece of romaine lettuce and it tastes like vanilla. You can eat a Hana yam and have foodgasms because you think you're eating cake. You can eat a Japanese sweet potato and say, oh my God, this is so sweet, I can't even eat it. When you fall in love with whole food, you can eat it and you can have as pleasurable as experience as people that are eating all that other crap, but you have to give yourself some time to neuroadapt. The simpler you eat, the more simple you want to eat. And simple eating not only is cheaper, but it takes a lot less time for preparation, and then you have more time to do other things in life, like meditate, like exercise. So the idea isn't that you have to eat broccoli and rice every day, but the idea is to choose food and eat ingredients. So instead of doing a complicated recipe and triggering yourself by looking at blogs and cookbooks and all that kind of stuff, do the batch cooking that Chef Darshana showed you, or Tammy Kramer, where you always have ingredients ready. You have grains that you've batch cooked. You've had beans that you've batch cooked. You've had starches like winter squashes or sweet potatoes that you've batch cooked. You've roasted your vegetables. You might have one of those salad dressings that Chef Bravo showed you, or some California balsamic vinegar. And you construct your meals from ingredients. And by the way, kids love this. People love making their own food. And you can make healthy, what you call nourish bowls or Buddha bowls at every meal, where you take a grain, a green, a sauce. And by doing that way, the variety is endless. My goodness, there's 18,000 different kinds of legumes alone. But by focusing your meals on ingredients instead of recipes, the variety is endless, but you're not having that much variety of every meal because variety makes us overeat. For me and my family, we eat 2 to 3 things at every meal. So lunch is, for me, like I say, Hana yam and broccoli is my favorite. That's really what I enjoy. Dinner, like, let's see, what did we have last night? Last night we went crazy. We had air fries and we had rice and we had like a stir-fry dish. So we had 2 kind of, and then we also had salad. So we had 4 things last night, but it was a celebration of the last day of the speaker summit. So again, realize that you can always vary the sauce. If you do yummy sauce, there's at least 20 variations, but variety will make you overeat. And the more you're willing to eat simply, the easier it's going to be to lose weight, maintain your weight loss. It's going to be easier for your budget, and it's going to be easier for your preparation time, because you'll have less time to make complicated recipes and you'll have more time for what you want to do in life to also achieve your goal, like exercise or perhaps practice mindfulness. So number 2, what the successful people have learned, like Dr. McDougall said, is that this is a starch-based diet and that most of the calories come from starch, but also with salads and veggies and fruit as well, but it's not, most of the calories aren't coming from fruit. I know that Dr. McDougall says eat 80 to 90% of your calories from starch, but in his book, where I learned most from, the McDougall Program for Maximum Weight Loss, the majority, not that many calories come from starch. I say 50 to 70%. Now, the volume needs to come from salads and vegetables, and this is why I don't like the all-potato diet, because they're getting no roughage, they're getting no thylakoids, which are what's going to help you the most. But the idea is, and I'll give you how this looks for me, because I need I don't know, 1,700 to 2,000 calories a day approximately for my exercise, I'm getting 3 to 4 pounds of starch a day, and I'm getting probably 4 to 6 pounds of vegetables a day. So the most of my calories, so let's say on the days that I'm not doing any exercise, I eat about 3 pounds of starch. Maybe I have a pound in it. My sweet potato at lunch always weighs about 1.5 pounds. That's about 600 calories. And then I have it with 2 pounds of veggies. Well, that's 800 calories, but 200 came from vegetables, but most of it came from starch, but the volume came from the vegetables. And the same thing at dinner, when we had that huge stir fry, probably 400 to 500 calories came from rice, and maybe only 1 to 200 came from vegetables, but it was a huge volume. So I would say that about 75% of my calories come from starches, but the majority of my volume comes from vegetables and then a little bit of fruit. And if you look at the calorie density chart, if you eat less than 600 calories per day, according to the research done by Dr. Rolls, the number was 567, you can eat this style called ad libitum as much as you want, whenever you want, as often as you want, except we don't recommend night eating until comfortably full. But the thing is for a lot of people, we have to sequence our meals. We can't just eat all the potatoes we want and then try to fill in the vegetables. No, you've got to sequence. You've got to eat the meals first, which is why I recommend vegetables for breakfast. You eat them, and then when you're hungry again, you eat more vegetables with starch. So I'm never eating starches alone. I might eat vegetables alone, but I'm always eating starches with vegetables, so that half your plate, by visually looking at it, is always non-starchy vegetables. But you've got to have starch. Without starch, no satiety. Too many people, after a slip or a relapse, will think that, the potatoes made them fat. And this is the problem that happens when people come over to this way of eating from keto or paleo or weighing and measuring. They eat a potato and the scale goes up 4 pounds. And they go, see, potatoes make me fat. You cannot gain fat eating potatoes. They're 1 calorie a gram. But what you can do is gain 4 pounds of body weight temporarily, 2 in water and 2 in glycogen. You cannot get fat eating potatoes. Dr. Lyle has done many videos about this. But if you're coming from a low carb or a weighing and measuring program where carbohydrates has been restricted, of course the scale is going to go up, but you are not gaining fat. It is not possible. But if you don't eat starch, you won't have satiety. You will not have enough calories to do your exercise. So I'm not a fan of just eating fruits and vegetables. I know it works for Robbie Barbero, but he's an extraordinary human with type 1 diabetes. For most people without starch, you are going to fail, like Dr. McDougall says. We need this. Our hunger drive needs the starch. Our brain needs the calories from the starch. If you're trying to get it from fruits and vegetables, then you've got to eat 13 pounds of food like Robbie. So there's so many wonderful starches, not just rice and beans, but sweet potatoes and all the wonderful winter squashes. But one of the most freeing things about losing weight with a full plate is you get to eat a lot of potatoes, rice, and beans. And this is what you've been told to avoid, and everything you've been told, the exact opposite is true. But my successful clients eat a lot of vegetables for calorie density and for filling up on fewer calories, but they don't neglect the starches ever. They're so important to your satiety and long-term success. You will be very hungry if you just eat fruits and vegetables, I assure you. This is the one that people don't like, but I'm so glad that Dr. Roberts proved what I was saying is correct, is we avoid restaurants like the plague. To us, eating at restaurants is punishments. And I know many of you say, but they're so great for socialization. Well, so are other activities. If your whole life is just centered around eating and hedonic eating, then I don't know how successful you're going to be. We have to find ways to have meaningful relationships outside of food. And that doesn't mean food can't be present. Have a potluck, join a meetup, have people at your house. Restaurants are the kiss of death for anyone trying to eat healthy or overcome food addiction. I worked at a restaurant for years, so I'm going to tell you that restaurants use more sugar, fat, and salt than you ever would at home, and there is no such thing as a compliant meal at a restaurant. An honest chef will tell you this, like the chef on the cruise that I often have spoken on. The first year I went on the Holistic Holiday at Sea Cruise, I tried ordering rice and vegetables, and I couldn't figure out why it was so salty and so greasy, because I specifically said no oil. So I asked to speak to the head chef, and he explained to me that this is true in all restaurants, but especially in cruises where they're serving 4,000 to 6,000 people. When you go to a restaurant, your food is not made to order. It's prepped to order, but it's not made to order. If you think that when you order steamed vegetables, that they are now taking out a clean pot that never had oil in it and boiling them, you're nuts. Restaurants have these big burners with these huge things of water going all day. And guess what, guys? That water has oil and salt in it. So when they dunk your vegetables in or blanch them for a minute, that's why they taste salty, because there's salt in the water and there's going to be residual oil. Look, I promote Sharky's because they're doing the best they can to make this healthier. I put it on my Facebook page yesterday. But even when you get the AJ burrito bowl or plate, they are steaming that broccoli on the same grill that they just had all the animal products and oil on. So there's no way to get a truly oil-free meal in a restaurant. I'm pretty sure that's the case. I mean, I guess maybe if you order a plain salad, you might be okay, but how satisfying is that, So you have to understand that there's no such thing as a compliant meal at a restaurant. But the other thing you have to understand is that when you go to a restaurant, your food doesn't taste as good. In other words, like, I can eat sweet potato and broccoli at home and love it, but I go to a restaurant that maybe ostensibly can make it, and I got to walk by the vegan pastry case and be triggered by all that stuff, and then see everybody else eating better, well, I don't think it's better, but it seems like it, lasagna and pizza, and then all of a sudden my potatoes and broccoli don't taste that good. So it's a very unsatisfying experience. I'm paying a lot more money for very little food, and don't forget those forgotten 500 calories that are coming from oil that Dr. Roberts talked about that we don't course correct for the next day. So restaurants, just like variety, are the kiss of death for the food addict. And I think when I have a client that finally says to me, I was right, I'm not eating at restaurant, that's when I know they're going to be successful long term. If your life is designed around restaurants and alcohol and this kind of food, I don't know if you're going to have the same kind of success for those of us that look at restaurants as a punishment. That doesn't mean that we never go. We learn to navigate menus. This is something that I'm teaching soon in the Lose Weight with a Full Plate Masterclass, how we can do this. Or we go with a full belly, or we sneak in some of our own food, or even bring in our own food and just pay them to let us eat our own food. Doesn't mean that I'm invited to my cousin's 50th wedding anniversary, I'm going to say, no, I don't eat at restaurants. But we don't go on purpose. We find other ways to interact with people, and instead of just food. If your all the pleasure you're getting from life and from socialization is from food, you're going to have a hard time. Find ways to have meaningful interactions that don't involve restaurants and don't involve foods, and realize if you're eating a restaurant, you're getting 500 calories more from oil, and even if you think there's no oil added, it's there, I promise you. And so is the salt and probably the sugar. You can try your best saying you're deathly allergic, but I'll tell you, you know that when you would rather eat your food in plentiful amounts, your simple food, you've arrived, and you're probably no longer going to struggle with this. So another thing, the fourth habit that I see in my clients is they practice abstinence. And that doesn't mean they do it as strict as I do, but they have this concept of non-negotiables, that there's something that they make a line in the sand and they don't cross. Now for me, I practice abstinence in a lot of ways. I practice abstinence from sugar, from oil, from flour, from alcohol. I don't, believe it or not, practice abstinence from salt. I can explain why in a minute. I don't add salt or eat salt, but because I do travel and I know I'm going to have it, I don't want to say, well, I'm abstinent of something that I'm not. I practice abstinence for the most part of restaurant eating. People that understand food addiction, that are very vulnerable, and by the way, this exists on a continuum, with some of us being more vulnerable and some being less. We understand this concept of abstinence because it's easier for us to do 100% than 99%, because once we're called into the pleasure trap, it's very hard for us to crawl out of it. It's like Lay's potato chips. Bet you can't eat just months. But a lot of people understand this concept of abstinence or non-negotiables for other reasons. So for example, people that are ethical vegans make eating animals a non-negotiable. They're abstinent from eating animal products. They don't eat them if they're tired or if they're stressed or if they had trauma or if they're hungry because they forgot to bring food. For them, it's a complete non-negotiable. People that are Orthodox Jews do not eat certain things like pork or things, whether they're tired, whether they're lonely, whether they're stressed, because they understand this concept of abstinence, because they have as their foundation there's reasons that they do it, just not just because of the dietary part. And so when we work with people to create the why that makes you cry, it's very easy to not eat animal products if you're an ethical vegan, and it's very easy to not eat pork if you are an Orthodox Jew, because it's part of your identity. And so my identity is somebody, and I'm very proud of abstinence actually, because when I approach my 60th birthday, I'm going to be approaching, I believe, my 3,000th day of abstinence. See, because to me, abstinence is freedom. You know, Ben Franklin said that it's far easier to suppress the first desire than to try to satisfy all that follow. And what was his name? That Saint Augustine said that complete abstinence is easier than perfect moderation. I don't see moderation working for most people, especially people that are overweight or stuck in the pleasure trap. And so the idea is you don't necessarily have to be abstinent of everything, but every successful client I've had has some non-negotiables. Not everybody's abstinent from caffeine or chocolate. I have clients that can do the chocolate balsamic vinegars on their banana ice cream. I can't. But this idea of having certain things be non-negotiable, and not because you, oh, poor me, I can't have sugar. No, I'm empowered. I don't eat sugar. I don't eat foods that make me fat, sick, and addicted, that harm animals. And so to me, it's empowering, and all the clients I've had that have been successful have some things as abstinence. For me, I teach the SOFA's-free way of eating: sugar, oil, flour, alcohol, salt. Also to stay away from trigger foods. So again, for some people like me, that's nuts. I can't have peanut butter anywhere within smelling distance. And for other people, it's gateway foods. So for example, carob, for example, for one of my clients, Dr. Goldhammer's always said, carob is a gateway drug to the use of chocolate. Carob is a Mediterranean pot. It's a fruit. But if they eat it on their banana ice cream, guess what they want next is chocolate. So some foods for some people, even eating seeds, can be a gateway food to having other foods that are off plan. So this idea of creating your own personal abstinence for certain things and making certain things non-negotiable, it makes it so much easier. And people say, well, but if I abstain from this, I'll want it more. Well, only if you're an addict. Only if you're an addict. And that's how you know you are, because you can't abstain from it. And the things we're asking you to abstain from are not whole natural foods anyway. They're processed foods, and the foods that are going to perpetuate your food addiction and make it very difficult for you to lose weight. Another habit that my successful clients and myself have in common are daily movement. And we learned from the Shirzais and Dr. Chen that it has to be sweaty movement. Look, I'm the biggest fan of yin and restorative yoga, and I do it. But that doesn't count. You have to sweat, and you have to sweat at least 30 minutes a day, and preferably every day. You know, exercise is not going to help you lose weight. According to the Scientific American Journal, it contributes negligibly to weight loss. It does help in weight management, but what it does is it improves your self-esteem, especially when you do it first thing in the morning, your ability to stick to your healthy eating plan. We know now that it prevents Alzheimer's and builds those brain neurons, but it is something that my successful clients do every day, because what it does is it impresses their internal audience and keeps them on plan. You know, Dr. Lyle talks about how you can eat all day pretty well and blow it with a 2,000 calorie binge at night, but you can't take away exercise. Once you do it, you're done. You do it first thing in the morning. You've impressed your internal audience. You've increased your willpower and your ability to stick on plan. I have so many clients that struggle just because they refuse to exercise. Now, we know some people have orthopedic problems or disabilities, and this may not be something that you can do right now, but you can always work towards it. Dr. Roizen had a patient who was a diabetic grandmother, and she was in a wheelchair, and he gave her a pedometer and said, I just want you to notice how many steps you take. She goes, well, I don't even walk except to go to the bathroom. And he goes, that's okay. I just want to see how many steps you're taking. And she said, at the end of the day, it was 66 steps. And he said, oh, that's okay. Every day, just do one more step. And eventually, she was at 10,000 steps on the Dr. Oz show and no longer diabetic. And so the thing is you've got to start somewhere, but you've got to have something that you do every day. And just like the greens or the vegetables for breakfast, you don't have to like it, you have to do it. But if you want to be successful long term, you're going to have to find a way to make it part of your daily life. And I work with a guy named John Pierre. He has worked with people even in wheelchairs with the most severe disabilities. There are people that can help you find a way to move every day. It's got to be one of your non-negotiables. Habit 6 of 7, and we learned this again from Tammy Kramer, and we learned this from Chef Darshana, is always be prepared. Preparation trumps motivation. You can't expect the world to be set up to feed you healthy, especially if you're eating the way that we recommend. It does not magically appear. If you go to the grocery store, it is very difficult, except in the produce and bulk aisle, to even find food that doesn't have sugar, oil, and salt in it. By definition, that is what a processed food is. So how can you be prepared? Well, there's a few ways. One, you learn some simple batch cooking techniques like Tammy Kramer teaches. Two, you get somebody to do it for you. It's not that expensive. You can go to your local community college job board and put an ad out and pay somebody, I don't know, $10 or $15 an hour, depending on what city you live in, and do what Dr. Lyle does, where they buy the food, they shop, they chop, and they put it in little glass jars, and he knows how to boil his own water and put simple meals together, again, coming down to simple meals. Or you use Mama Says, either all the time if you can afford it, or occasionally, so that you always have that backup. And she has an SOS-free Chef AJ compliant line. But the thing is if all you have is healthy food, you will eat it. And you have to have it in your house. You have to have it with you. I have a free webinar, How to Eat Healthy Anywhere, that you can see on YouTube. I always have healthy food with me. I never leave my house without starch and vegetables, even if I'm doing a short errand. And how do I know this is important? Because a couple years ago, I literally got in a car accident turning right out of my driveway. And it was 10 hours until I got home from the hospital. Can you imagine? I mean, I wouldn't have starved because hunger's not an emergency. But can you imagine if I just thought, well, I'm just going to the store, I'm not going to take my food. I always have healthy food with me, wherever I go, where I travel, if I'm going to somebody else's house for dinner. But you have to make it happen, either by learning how to do it yourself, hiring somebody to do it, or using Mama Says. And then habit of 7 is to create a clean environment. You heard from all the experts how important this is. You have to at least try. You can't give up saying, well, my family won't support you. You heard from the speakers that that's what they need to do, that if they love you, they will support you, and they have to stop sabotaging you. Give yourself the gift of a clean environment. Ask your family for 30 days just to see if it makes a difference. Have a session with Dr. Lyle or Dr. Hawk where they can teach you, based on the personality of yourself and the difficult ones in your environment that aren't allowing this, how to negotiate a clean environment. If you can't afford a $75 session, you can call in free to their podcast on Wednesday night and ask them how to facilitate this. If it's in your house, it's in your mouth. As Dr. Campbell says, Dr. Tom Campbell, that is, if you have temptation anywhere in your environment, you will fail. And that does not mean you're a failure. It is not your fault. You weren't designed to have an environment full of these foods. You learned this from Dr. Lyle and Dr. Hawk and Dr. Guillenette. Your brain did not evolve to sustain this type of pleasure trap environment. It evolved in an environment of scarcity. And that's why it is so hard when it's there. And I can give you hundreds of examples for clients that thought they could coexist with these foods. The reason I am successful is because I am in a pristine environment and I always have healthy food ready. Remember that willpower is a short-lived commodity. It can be increased through exercise, but it's only required if you have to make a decision. When you have a clean environment, no willpower is necessary. And that's why it's such a beautiful gift that you deserve and that you can give yourself, and this can be negotiated. I mean, unless you're literally in a prison cell, you can always negotiate a clean environment. It may be difficult, and there might have some difficult conversations you have to have, like Tammy did with Tom, but it can be done. Don't give up until you do everything you can. If you hang around a barber shop, it's just a matter of time until you get a haircut, which is why Dr. Lyle has always said that whatever the problem is, we must work harder on our environment than we do ourselves. No one has ever failed in a clean environment, as evidenced by the facts that everyone that goes to True North succeeds. You know, if you could have done it alone, you would have done it already. So we really recommend that you connect with the wonderful people that you've met through this summit on the page. That's why we keep asking you where you're from. We've connected a couple of people from Milwaukee already, and from Canada and from Chicago. I have a group called Feel Fabulous Over 40. You can do a free 2-week trial to see if you resonate with that group. And if not, just glean what you can the 2 weeks you're there, listening to all of the wonderful exclusive content from Dr. Lyle and a lot of my exclusive recipes. But try to really get connected to someone else that can support you through this journey. You don't have to do it alone. There's lots of resources, and consider owning the summit for life, because so you can be reminded all the resources out there, all the information. And if you get it by midnight Pacific time, you'll not only help us continue our mission to get these out to the people that need it, that can't afford it, and we have lots of scholarships that we have already awarded, but you can get a buddy pass, so it's like getting it for half price. Is that it? Oh, so I asked Toby, I said, and I thank you guys so much for your comments about my interviewing skills. And the reason I thank you is because I try really hard to not get in the way of the speaker. I know that when I watch interviewers, I get really annoyed when they don't shut up. And my purpose on the summit is to have them talk and me to facilitate the tech and get their message out and only speak when it's absolutely necessary. But I've also thought, gosh, I wish I could be interviewed for my own summit, especially the last 2 questions, because the last 2 questions are the same for every speaker. If you've noticed, there's a pattern. The second to last question is always, what would you say to somebody who's given up hope that they could ever lose weight? And so far, everyone has said that there's always hope. And so what I would say to somebody who's given up hope is, if that really is the case, watch my story from fat vegan to skinny bitch, because then you'll see somebody that had given up hope. But also what I would say is, go to True North. They've had over 30,000 patients in the last 32 years that have given up hope, that now have hope. And it wasn't just, as people don't go to True North necessarily to lose weight, by the way. I personally know people that walked into True North blind, that can see now. I know people that walked into True North with cancer, that are now cancer-free, that are actually written up in prestigious medical journals. And I'm talking about people I personally know, not people I've heard of, because I worked there for 10 years. I know people that walked into True North with daily headaches for 15 years that are now free of headaches. So somebody that's given up hope, I would say you haven't gone to True North, because that is a place where hope can be renewed, because you're in an environment of rest with the most fabulous people, 7 of them actually speakers on this summit. So that is a place that will definitely renew your hope. And what I would say, if you've given up hope, is that you really haven't tried doing my plan the way I recommend it. Because the truth is many of the people do Chef AJ's program with their own twists, with their own variables, with their own tweaks. I haven't met somebody yet that really diligently did my program the way it was designed for 30 days in a clean environment that has lost hope. But it's not the ultimate weight loss program with the wine, with the chocolate, with the coffee, with the salt. So if you've given up hope, then you haven't tried everything. And if that really is the case, go to True North, because I have seen so many people recover from what was considered hopeless there. And I myself, at one point, was a hopeless case. So that's what I would say. In the last question, so what is the real truth about weight loss? I would say the real truth about weight loss is that you have to find a way to lose weight that you enjoy, that you're going to be able to stick with. Because if it's not enjoyable, it's not going to be sustainable. And if you don't continue to do what you did to lose weight, you won't maintain your weight loss. Because weight loss actually is very easy. It's the weight maintenance that's hard, which is why I say find the least restrictive plan that you can do that will give you the results you want. But you have to be realistic and keep doing what you did instead of going back to some other plan. So find the one that you like, that works for you, and keep doing it. The truth about weight loss is it's actually quite simple, but doing it is difficult. And again, it comes down to the environment, the environment that we live in, our social environment, our work environment. You have to be diligent. You don't have to be perfect, but you have to keep trying. And the truth about weight loss is, if you want it bad enough, if you really want it bad enough, it can be yours. I'm Chef AJ. Thank you so much for listening. I truly believe you can have both the health and the body that you deserve. Oh my God, I still have to talk? Okay, God, I gotta... Can't you talk? Okay, so I'm not going to read, I'm going to read first names or last names. Or...
First names only.
I'm going to read first names only. And, of course, we have your email, so we'll contact you. And so, again, I want to thank all the generous sponsors and donors of the prizes, and I'm going to be making an even better video with all the links so that you guys can please support them. So, the winner of an Instant Pot, her name is Pam, and she is blind, and she is going to learn how to prepare this way of eating for herself, and her brother is going to help her shop. Dear Chef AJ and Toby, words seem insufficient to express how I feel after attending the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. At the end of each day, I feel educated, empowered, and energized. I've been blind since birth. Disability is no excuse. My brother, who is a chef, has agreed to accompany me to the market so I can get the items that I need. A vision rehabilitation specialist will be working with me to learn how to prepare meals safely and independently. And of course, I will purchase the Summit package. So the reason we chose an Instant Pot for you, Pam, is because even if you were sighted, it is the easiest way to prepare healthy, delicious, plentiful food. And thank you so much for sharing your story, and congratulations. And thank you to Instant Pot. So, Francine, she had written us a letter about her hardship, financial hardship. She lost her dad to diabetes while he was outside washing a car, had a massive heart attack, and never recovered. She was in an abusive marriage to a drunk, and it was difficult to escape. Her mom was diagnosed with kidney cancer. It spread through her body, and the physicians never knew about any treatment other than chemo, which ended her life faster. She had to sell her home and now recovering from surgery. And so we felt that the best thing for anybody recovering from surgery would be a week of delicious, compliant, SOS-free. Mama says you just have to reheat it. You can freeze it. And we wish you well. And thank you for writing us with your story. And by the way, I love all the stories. And if you didn't win, it didn't mean you didn't have a great story. But it's like there was 4 of us that literally were up all night reading hundreds of these, trying to choose. And so, okay, so Michael, you had, and again, this was like 3 beautifully written pages, and I'm obviously not going to read all of it, but Michael said he was going to start the keto diet with his wife because he wanted to lose weight. But his sister had been an ethical vegan for 2 years and wanted him to try a plant-based lifestyle. She introduced him to the Truth About Weight Loss Summit, and it blew him away. He loved listening to a whole new side of food that he never heard in depth or understood. They decided to go plant-based 30 days and ended up losing 30 pounds. He went from 248 to 218 and hadn't been that weight since 8th grade. He didn't do completely whole foods SOS free, which is why he thinks his wife didn't lose weight. And also he had more to lose, and hopefully one day she'll see that this works. Most of his friends and some family are dairy and cattlemen. When you challenge them, you affect their livelihood. You don't want to put people out of business, but something has to change, and their hate is strong. This is such a problem today. Why can't people have a conversation without hating the other person for thinking differently? I have told many people this is so crazy. I grow almonds, and when I find someone who doesn't eat almonds, that's okay. But when you tell someone you don't eat meat and dairy, they say F asterisk 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 K U. I'm going to try to get things moving in the right direction thanks to you two. Having worked in the film industry, I understand what goes into producing something like this. Please continue to bring the Great Summit to us, and maybe we can get it out to the masses. Anyway, you wrote a lot more. We loved your story very much, Michael. And because you said you grew almonds, we thought the perfect gift for you would be the Ace High-Powered Blender by Instant Pot, because it makes the creamiest almond milk. And congratulations on your success, and hopefully you'll get your wife back on board. So, this is an incredible story from Thermos, who was over 550 pounds. So, guys, please know that there is hope. He had sleep apnea when his weight was over 550 pounds. And for years, he had supplemental oxygen. Today, he needs none. His pulmonary hypertension is being treated, and his type 2 diabetes is being managed. And he's looking forward to eliminating some of his 15 medications. But one of the reasons we're giving you a prize, Thermos, as you said, your seminar brought me to the realization of how bad any oil really is. So we thought the perfect gift for you would be a Holland bowl and mezzalune, so that you can make your salads even more delicious without oil by chopping them. And you'll be able to personalize that bowl in any way that you want. It's a very inspirational saying, if you like. So congratulations on getting your weight down to 320 pounds, and we wish you continued success on your journey. And stopping that oil is going to make a huge difference. Okay, this is from Janice, and Janice said that her husband just suffered a stroke, and because she has been successful in this lifestyle, losing 40 pounds, she's been able to care for him. But the end of January, she was starting to feel sorry for herself and slip and have an occasional slack, which grew into more often. You know what they say, Janice? Occasional snack, bigger slack, how's the deal? One slip blossomed into a serious problem. Enter the real truth about Weight Loss Summit. And so she purchased the Summit package, but we thought, since you have to take care of your husband now, and we want to give him healthy, delicious food, an air fryer might be something you could use. And we thank Instant Pot for their new air fryer, and we hope you enjoy it, and we hope that's going to help you get back on track and stay on track. And we're sorry to hear about your husband, and hope that he'll be recovering as soon as possible. So, Peggy, you have been so amazing sharing this summit, and you are going to be getting a wonderful present after I read a little bit of your story. Let's see, you're 100 pounds overweight at one point, learned about drinking your ketones, lost 50 pounds, and if you thought you'd figured out how to control your weight, but you became diabetic. One doctor put you on metformin. It wasn't worth the side effects, didn't want to take insulin. You came across the summit. Talk about being convinced. I'm convinced. You signed up for Forks Over Knives meal planner since your mother didn't know how to cook, and you bought the summit. So you just have such a wonderful story, and we want you to stay on track. So we're going to give you the Forks Over Knives annual meal planner. And if you already have it, don't worry, because then they're just going to extend it for another year. And this is a tool I use, and obviously you're going to love it. And your story we have 3 pages, so we're not going to read it all, but we did read it all, and we loved it, and we love you for supporting the summit, and we want to support you now with an annual meal plan. Okay, we have Chris, who was a 16-year breast cancer survivor, and the past year was diagnosed with a recurrence that spread to multiple sites. And she was told about this by her sister, I believe, Jody. I think that's the right person. And you have a battle ahead. I do not know what extent the whole food plant-based diet will help me fight this cancer, but I'm excited and I'm hopeful. And we're hopeful too. And one of the things we want to impress upon you, like Dr. Furman said, no oil. Oil can be, causes cancer in his opinion. So to make it easier for you to cook without oil, we're gifting you from Melfi their wonderful nonstick pan, so you can saute and cook without oil. And we wish you much success on your journey and your recovery. And consider having a free consultation with Dr. Goldhammer at True North to see if that might be a place that can help you. Okay, so Shelley, starting from a weight of 400 pounds, lots of ups and downs, lost over 1,000 pounds, when you take it all together in her life. And I'm glad that Josh inspired you. She says, it's easy to get weight off, but you lose your credibility when you gain it back. I was working with willpower and deprivation and starving myself, and we know that doesn't work because, as you said, you stopped and the weight came back on. felt like something really bad was going to happen to you, and you were beating yourself up because of the fact that you were letting it happen. And that's where the self-love comes in that Dr. Peake and one of the other doctors talked about. Who was the other doctor that talked about Howard Jacobson, and I think a few of the doctors talked about that. You got an email from me talking about my Lose Weight with a Full Plate program. It felt right. You signed up quickly, and let's see. Sorry, guys, I'm just really tired. I'm feeling so much less pain, in control, and have been absolutely enjoying the food. You have an Instant Pot, so we thought, to keep you on track for an entire year, what would be better than another annual Forks Over Knives meal plan? And we thank Forks Over Knives so much for generously donating this wonderful prize. But everybody can be a winner of a free 2-week trial with both the Forks Over Knives meal plan and the Feel Fabulous group. So now we have the grand prize. Let me tell you something before I say your name. I'll say the name at the end. I don't even have this. And this sounds like the coolest thing in the world. I don't even know what it's called, but it's made by Instant Pot, and it's like an 8-quart Instant Pot, but it's got 2 lids, one for air frying, one for pressure cooking. This is really our grand prize, and thank you so much, Instant Pot, for donating it to. Oh no, this is where she was referred by her friend Jody Lynn. So your name is Dolly. Hello, Dolly. And she ate a diet of Twix for breakfast, potato chips for snacks, cookies, candies, cakes, ice cream. Sounded like my childhood, Dolly. Lost her teeth at an early age. Chubby kid in the class. Sounds like me too. Endometriosis. Sounds like me. Depression. Me. GERD. Me. Didn't have lupus like you did. 4 years in a wheelchair. Unable to walk. Only had 4 months in a wheelchair. Her friend Jody encouraged her to get my book. And she got the Audible version. She was intrigued that she could eat potatoes and high-carb fruits. Anyway, you are getting the grand prize, Dolly, and we hope you enjoy it. I don't even have one of these, so let me tell you, you have to show me how to use it. She had lupus, 4 years in a wheelchair, so now she knows she can eat carbs, and we can all eat carbs. So we've got more prizes that we'll probably end up giving out to you without announcing, with some of you that sent your story in, because there was things that we didn't give out today, like the vinegars and the salt, but I think I've kept them long enough, don't you? I've kept myself long enough. So remember, you have till midnight Pacific time if you'd like to own the Summit Package for life and then get the free Buddy Pass. You will be able to get it afterwards, but it won't be as inexpensive as it is now. So what can I say other than thank you? It's been an honor, a privilege, and a pleasure to share my passion with you, my life's work, and that's all I can say is I'm really hungry and tired. So thank you guys so much, and please, if we do a replay, please always consider sharing it with your friends so that they can watch this as well and listen.